The night over the Mediterranean is strangely different. The sea here is not just water and waves, it is memory, the layered whispers of generations of merchants, sailors, and even the silent gods on the horizon. On the moonlit surface of the sea, the wind blows through the Phoenician wooden boats carrying a soft hiss like the distant breath of history. If we listen carefully, amidst the sound of the waves, we will hear the story of a princess who left her homeland, carrying in her heart the pain of betrayal and the aspiration to build a new land. Her name was Alyssa, but posterity would call her Dido. Many centuries before Rome appeared on the world map, when Assyria still reigned in the east and the fading shadows of the Bronze Age lingered, Phoenicia was the land of purple, the color of wealth, and also the color of blood. The Phoenicians were adventurous merchants, masters of the sea. They knew how to bend the wind, read the stars, and bring to the world the precious things that only the sea held in its heart. In this setting, Dido, princess of Tyre, became an exile. Her brother, Pygmalion, blinded by greed, had killed her husband, Acherbas, to seize his treasure. That night, under the flickering oil lamps, Dido and her loyal followers packed gold, silver, swords, and fragile hopes, leaving Tyre on cedar wood ships, heading west, where the sea and sunset merged into one. Some say that journey was not just an escape, it was a challenge to fate. Dido's fleet crossed seas that sailors only dared to mention in whispers. They passed Cyprus, where temples to the goddess of love looked down from white cliffs, through Rhodes, where the sun seemed to hang from the top of the mast, through Greek ports, where the smell of wine and incense mingled in the wind. But every time they docked, Dido did not stop. She knew that her new homeland must be where the sea whispered in the language of freedom. Finally, the purple sails found the promised land, a blue coastline in North Africa, where hills and white sand embraced each other. Here, Dido met a Berber king named Yarbas. The king asked her how much land she wanted. Dido smiled faintly, asking only for enough land to be covered by a single ox hide. When her request was granted, she cut the hide into hundreds of thin strips, joining them to form a circle that encompassed an entire large hill. From this wisdom, the city of Carthage was born, where the first waves touched the stones and whispered, "This is home." Carthage, where the sea and people breathed. Together Carthage was not born to be an empire. It began as a base, a refuge, a place where refugees from Tyre could rebuild their dreams. Wooden houses were built along the harbor, workshops buzzed with the sound of hammers striking bronze and iron, and small temples filled with incense smoke, where people prayed to Tanit, the goddess of the moon and fertility, and Baal Hammon, the lord of fire and the sky. But the location of Carthage was special. It was situated where the Mediterranean seemed to narrow, a trade route connecting the two worlds of East and West. Any ship from Greece, Egypt, or even distant Gaul wanting to go west passed within sight of Carthage. Like a giant door between the seas, Carthage gradually became the center of the flow of commerce. Phoenician merchants saw this potential. They brought goods to Carthage from all over: purple glass, ivory, wine, amber, silver from Spain, and tin from distant Britain. The port of Carthage quickly became a meeting place for the world, where in a single morning one could hear the cries of Libyan traders, the songs of Greeks, the prayers of Jews, and the laughter of sailors from foreign seas. Dido, the city's founder, probably never imagined that the piece of land measured by an ox hide would one day become one of the greatest commercial centers of the ancient world. But the sea knew. The sea had seen the sparkling lights of ships coming and going ceaselessly, and in the wind, the sea told that Carthage was not built only of stone and wood, but also of the faith of those who had once lost everything. The voice of time. If we were to stroll through the first streets of Carthage, we would hear the wind blowing through the grains of sand, like the tales of the souls who laid the city's foundation. The sound of children playing among the stone-paved alleys, the laughter of artisans forging a sword or carving a relief. At the port, cedar wood ships lined up, preparing to set sail, carrying the dreams of an entire people. But Carthage was not just about commerce. It was the harmony between man and the sea. The Carthaginians believed the sea had a soul. Every wave was a message, every storm the wrath of the gods. They did not just go to sea to trade. They went to sea as a ritual, a way to converse with the world. Carthage grew like a child of the sea, nurtured by wind, waves, and ambition. The story of this city is like a lullaby floating on the white-capped waves. It did not begin with war or power, but with the desire to live, to exist, and to leave a mark in time. Carthage in its early days was like a rough gem polished by the sea. As time passed, each wave acted like a patient hand, grinding and shaping, gradually revealing the city's sparkling features. On Barca Hill, the land measured by an ox hide, wooden columns rose, stone slabs were laid, and the sounds of hammers and workers' songs merged with the sound of the waves. No one knows the exact day Carthage was officially called a city. Perhaps it was not built in a moment, but breathed out from the heart of the sea, like a long sigh of the wind. The purple roads and the footsteps of yore. The Phoenicians were famous for the color purple, the color of royalty, made from tiny purple-shelled sea snails found deep on the seabed. They carried this purple color throughout the Mediterranean, exchanging it for silver from Spain, gold from Nubia, and gems from the East. Carthage quickly became the transit hub for these purple roads. In the early mornings, the port was like a hazy rainbow, as rolls of fabric, jars of olive oil, and amphorae of wine were stacked, waiting for the sails to open towards the horizon. We can imagine a Carthaginian merchant standing on a wooden pier, looking out to sea. He has amber-colored eyes, as deep as the Mediterranean water. In his hand is a roll of purple cloth. On his shoulder, the dream of distant markets that only the wind god knows. That man needed no royal title. For him, the sea was his throne, trade his mission, and every voyage a prayer. The temples of fire and moon Carthage did not live on goods alone. It lived on faith. The religion of the Carthaginians was not a set of dry doctrines, but the breath of daily life. They worshipped Tanit, the goddess of birth, of the faint crescent moon. The symbol of Tanit was not elaborate, just a triangle standing on a horizontal line with a circle above it like the moon casting its shadow on the sea. Beside her was Baal Hammon, the god of the sky and fire, a symbol of strength and protection. When the sun set, the port was bathed in the crimson light of dusk, and the Carthaginians brought offerings to the temple, wine, bread, flowers, and even their sweat, to pray for a safe journey. The sound of leather drums beat slowly, like the city's heartbeat. Incense smoke billowed, mingling with the sea breeze, carrying prayers out to the distant sea. I often think that Carthage at that time was like a living organism. The port was its chest, inhaling and exhaling with the rhythm of the waves. The temples were its heart, where fire and prayer burned unceasingly. The streets were its veins, flowing with laughter, vendor cries, and the lively sound of hammers from the shipyards. The people, children of the sea. The Carthaginians did not live to conquer with sword and spear. They conquered with their trade network. They did not dream of being rulers like the Assyrians or Egyptians, but of being a bridge connecting distant lands. The men sailed the seas, while the women wove cloth, made pottery, and kept the fire in the temples. Carthaginian children grew up with the smell of sea salt in their hair, with the sound of waves as their mother's lullaby. In the markets, we see skilled artisans making glasses of purple-hued glass, gleaming bronze masks, and small statues carved in the likeness of Tanit or Baal Hammon. Carthaginian craftsmen were renowned for their subtlety. They didn't just create objects, they created souls for inanimate things. When you touch a Carthaginian pottery vase, you can almost feel the warmth of the artisan who shaped it from clay and fire. The sea, the memory of eternity. For Carthage, the Mediterranean Sea was not just a path. It was memory, a treasury of thousands of stories. Every storm was a challenge, every wave a friend. The Carthaginians knew how to listen to the sea, knew when the wind would change direction, and knew the silent currents that flowed like the world's lifeblood. Perhaps no people understood the sea as they did, because it was the sea that had saved them from destruction entire. We can imagine, on bright moonlit nights, a group of Carthaginian sailors sitting around a campfire on the sand, telling each other about their voyages to lands no one had set foot on before. They told of distant islands where the wind carried strange scents, of mysterious tribes with shields carved with sun symbols, and of seas where the water was so deep a blue it seemed to see into a man's heart. The breath of the port city. Gradually, Carthage was no longer a small hideaway. It became a center where sea and land met, where commerce and faith intertwined. The city was surrounded by white stone walls that shimmered under the noon sun like an eternal promise. The port of Carthage was divided into two parts, one for merchant ships, one for the navy. The military harbor was designed in a circle with a small island in the center like the eye of the sea, where admirals stood to watch every ship coming and going. The galleys, long, slender, and fast, lined up around the port, their oars gleaming in the sun. Carthage did not like war, but the sea taught them that without protection, there could be no trade. And so, alongside the cargo ships, Carthage also built warships, like slender yet sharp swords, ready to protect their trade routes. A reflection on time. There is something very special about Carthage, something that reminds me of the heartbeat of the ancient world. It was not the brutal power of later Rome, nor the divine splendor of Egypt. Carthage was like a whisper of the sea, of the wind, of people who had lost everything and had to start anew. Time in Carthage flowed slowly, like a long, endless lullaby. Every day the sun rose, shining on the white walls and red-tiled roofs. Every night the moon drifted over the sea, illuminating the ships quietly setting sail. Life repeated itself, simple, peaceful, yet full of dreams, the markets of laughter and color. When the sun rose above the horizon, Carthage awoke with a new rhythm of life. The central market opened like a colorful painting. Rows of stalls hung with purple fabric shimmering in the morning sun, baskets of green and brown olives, and blocks of amber polished to shine like drops of honey. The cries of Carthaginian merchants mingled with the laughter of children, the clatter of pottery, and the calls of mothers to one another. Each market in Carthage was a miniature universe. There were stalls from Arabia with intoxicating spices, nutmeg, cinnamon, star anise. There were stalls from the north with animal hides, mead, and precious metals. And there were Greek merchants with their wine, hand-painted pottery, and stories of Athens, where philosophers debated the nature of the cosmos. The Carthaginian market was not chaotic, but had a rhythmic pulse. Buyers and sellers alike understood that each item here was not just material, but contained a story, a long journey across the sea. Each piece of fabric, each ceramic vase, seemed to carry within it the sound of crashing waves and the gaze of the sailors who had weathered storms to bring them to this port. Society and class. The city's shared ship Carthage was run like a great ship. At the bow stood the wealthy merchant families, those who had turned the sea into their livelihood. They were not nobles in the conquering sense of Rome or Egypt, but nobles of commerce, people who knew how to connect the world through goods, language, and trust. Below them were the artisans, blacksmiths, and potters who created the soul of Carthage through each product. They were the steady hands that kept the city's ship on course. Further down were the Libyan farmers, who grew wheat, grapes, and olives on the fertile lands around the city. Carthage also had slaves, mostly prisoners of war or people bought from distant markets. But in Carthage, even slaves were considered part of the commercial machine. They were taught trades, participated in production, and sometimes had the opportunity to gain freedom by saving up enough. This city operated in a practical yet strangely humane way. Art and philosophy. The whispered voices. Carthage is not famous for colossal pyramids or bloody arenas. Instead, their art carried the subtle breath of the sea. They carved waves, dolphins, the moon, and wind onto pottery and jewelry. In the temples, the symbol of Tanit was always present. Not ostentatious, but pure, as a reminder that everything in life begins with life, with the eternal cycle of the moon. The Carthaginians believed that the sea taught people patience and respect. They did not write as many philosophies as the Greeks, but each of their sea voyages was a vivid lesson in cooperation, faith, and acceptance. Man is like a small boat. The sea is fate. This proverb was whispered by the Carthaginians on moonlit nights. For them, each voyage was a conversation with the universe, with the wind, with the gods they believed watched over them on every white-capped wave. Afternoons on Barca Hill. In the afternoon, as the sun tilted westward, Barca Hill glowed with a warm, golden light. Children played beside the white columns, while mothers lit fires to cook dinner. The blacksmith stopped his hammer, wiped his sweat, and watched the last ship of the day leave the port, its sail like a bird's wing flying into the sunset. On the hill, the wind sweeping through the cloth banners at Tanit's temple sounded like a lullaby. The priests lit oil lamps, praying for the safe return of those at sea. A day in Carthage closed with familiar sounds, the lapping of waves against the wooden docks, the chime of bronze bells marking the watch, and the voices of elders telling children the story of Princess Dido's journey long ago. Carthage and the sea, a wordless love affair. There would be no Carthage without the sea. The sea was both a mother and a challenge. The sea sustained the city, giving it trade and wealth, but it also demanded courage. Many sailors set out and never returned, but in their hearts, the sea was not an enemy. It was where their souls merged with the white sand, the wind, and the white-capped waves. Each morning, as the first ship left the port, the entire harbor of Carthage seemed to hold its breath. A young wife stood by the wooden pier, her eyes following her husband's figure on the ship. Children waved goodbye to their fathers, promising to be good and learn pottery like their mothers. An old merchant placed his hand on his forehead, praying to Tanit and Baal Hammon for a favorable journey. Ambition beyond the horizon. From the very beginning, Carthage was not content to be just a stopping point. The Carthaginians looked further, to seas no one dared to venture. They drew star charts on goatskin, recording wind directions, depths, and hidden reefs. Each journey was a discovery, a step in opening the door connecting east and west. Soon, Carthage extended its network to Spain, Sardinia, Corsica, and even passed through the Strait of Gibraltar to trade with the mystical lands of the Atlantic. There are stories that Carthaginian ships once reached the British Isles, bringing back tin, a precious metal for making weapons and jewelry. Reflections on the beginning. When I think of early Carthage, I see it as a dewdrop on a sail, tiny, shimmering, yet containing the power of the entire sky. The Carthaginians did not have massive armies, but they had ambition, skill, and the belief that the world could be connected by trust and exchange. They were people of the sea, children of the wind. They did not build empires with blood, but with trade routes as long as songs. Every time the wind blows over Barca Hill, it feels as if we can still hear Dido's whisper, "Keep going, keep searching, for the sea will show the way." The hands that built the city Carthage did not rise from the sand like a miracle. It was the result of thousands of hands working together, building each wall, carving each stone. Potters, blacksmiths, carpenters, and sailors returning from afar all contributed a part of their soul to the city. Under the Mediterranean sun, blacksmiths with bare, sun-darkened backs struck iron with their hammers, sparks flying like tiny stars. Potters turned their wheels, their hands covered in clay, but their eyes shone as they created vases meant both to hold oil and to tell a story through their patterns. In Carthage, every craft carried a sense of pride because every product was a ticket for the city's survival and growth. The craftsman worked not just for himself, but for Carthage, for the shared ship of the entire community. The calls of the night sea. At night, Carthage was bathed in the warm light of oil lamps. From a distance, the harbor looked like a chain of stars fallen onto the water. The night wind carried the scent of salt, of pine resin from the ship hulls, and the aroma of baked bread from the stone ovens along the streets. Perhaps the most beautiful moment was when a large ship docked, bringing new stories. The sailors set foot on land, their eyes lighting up as if they had just touched another part of the world's soul. Stories of distant seas, of fierce storms and starlit nights, were retold by the fireside amidst the roaring laughter of the village. The Carthaginians lived not just on goods, but on these stories. Each returning journey was a piece of the collective history, of the shared memory that the sea and people wrote together. Religion and the eternal flame. Carthage was surrounded by temples where sacred flames burned day and night. In the Temple of Tanit, the firelight reflected on the stone walls, like the gentle eyes of the goddess watching over the city. Every time a ship left port, a handful of sacred ash from the temple was brought along for good fortune. Baal Hammon, the god of the sun and the sky, was worshipped during major festivals. The spring festival was a time when all of Carthage was immersed in the sound of leather drums, songs echoing through the streets, and the fragrance of perfumes, fresh flowers, and fruits. It was a time when everyone deeply felt that this city belonged not just to the present, but was connected to greater forces, the sea, the sky, and the memory of their ancestors. The circular harbor, the heart of Carthage. If Carthage was a living body, then the circular harbor was its heart. This circular military port was designed as an engineering marvel, with the central island serving as the admiral's headquarters. Seen from above, the port looked like a giant eye of the sea, always open and observing every movement. The warships of Carthage were lined up in rows, their oars gleaming. It was proof that Carthage was not just a city of merchants, but also of protectors. But the miracle was that even these warships bore the beauty of subtlety. They were decorated with patterns of waves and the moon, as if to remind that even in combat, Carthage never forgot it was a child of the sea, of life, and of exchange. The people and their aspiration. The people of Carthage, from old to young, grew up with the story of Dido. That story flowed in their blood, reminding them that this city was built from pain and hope. Every time they walked on Barca Hill, they could imagine the figure of the princess from long ago, with her determined gaze, daring to leave everything behind to find a new home. That aspiration became the soul of Carthage. It was not loud or ostentatious, but it smoldered, like the fire in Tanit's temple, burning forever without extinguishing. The Carthaginians believed that the sea would guide those who were brave enough. And it was this belief that made them constantly expand their horizons to foreign lands. Nature. A canvas. Never old. Every dawn in Carthage was a painting drawn with light. The sun rose, shining on the white walls and red-tiled roofs, making everything glow as if just born. At noon, the sea was a deep blue, and the wind carried the scent of salt and wildflowers. As evening fell, the sunset dyed the entire harbor gold, turning the ships into ethereal black silhouettes. At night, Carthage became quiet. The sound of waves lapping the shore was like the heartbeat of the world. The elderly sat in front of their homes, telling children stories about the sea gods, about the spirits of sailors who lay at the bottom of the ocean. These stories were not meant to frighten, but to remind them that the sea was both gentle and fierce, and that respect for the sea was the only way to survive. The philosophy of a young city. Early Carthage did not have imposing walls or large armies, but it had a clear philosophy of life. We are the bridge between worlds. They did not conquer by force, but by skill, trust, and the ability to connect. Every citizen of Carthage was a small thread, but together they wove a strong net that protected their city from the storms of history. Standing on the top of Barca Hill, one could see the sea stretching endlessly, like a mirror reflecting the entire sky. And in that moment, the Carthaginians understood that they were living not just for the present, but for future generations, who would continue to hear the whispers of the sea, continuing Dido's dream. There were days when the Mediterranean Sea was like an endless blue mirror, so calm that one could see the stars that had not yet risen. On that mirror, the ships of Carthage left the port, like a flock of migrating birds carrying the breath of the city, carrying hope, goods, and the whispers of their ancestors. The scent of the sea and the purple of Phoenicia. The Carthaginians were descendants of the Phoenicians, the people called the people of the sea. They were famous for Tyrian purple, a purple hue made from small sea snails, a color once considered the color of the gods. More than just a commodity, this purple was a symbol of their vision, refined, rare, and full of mystery. Rolls of purple-dyed fabric from Tyre, Sidon, or Carthage once made kings and queens in the West willing to trade gold and silver for them. Each roll carried the sound of the wind from the Lebanese coast, the moonlight, and the labor of workers who had patiently dyed and dried them for months. But Carthage did not stop at purple. From this port, ships carrying pearls, amber, tin, silver, and rare spices departed. In return, they brought back olive oil, wine, ivory, and countless other things that kept the harbor always full of color and sound. Sails like dreams. Imagine a morning in Carthage. Before the sun had risen, the port was already bustling. Sailors checked ropes, merchants weighed each crate of goods, and mothers brought hot bread to see their sons off to sea. The wind blew, filling the sails like chests full of hope. On each ship, besides the goods, there were stories, songs, and longing. Carthaginian sailors often carried amulets carved with the image of Tanit or Baal Hammon, as a reminder that the sea was not just a path, but a sacred world where humans needed protection. Each journey could last for months, crossing foreign seas where the sunset was as red as blood and sudden dark storms appeared. But for the Carthaginians, it was not just a challenge, it was a ritual of survival. Each returning ship was proof that the sea had accepted them, that the children of Carthage were still patient and brave enough to face the wind and waves. The trade routes, the lifeblood of the empire Carthage, gradually became a vast trade network, where each island, each small port, was a note in the symphony of the sea. From Carthage, ships sailed north to Sardinia and Corsica, where lush green forests grew, and the land yielded abundant agricultural products. Further on, they reached Iberia, modern-day Spain, where silver was mined from misty mountain ranges. The Carthaginians also passed through the Strait of Gibraltar, which they called the Pillars of Hercules, to enter the Atlantic, exploring pristine lands where only the sound of waves and seagulls were their companions. These trade routes carried not only goods, they carried knowledge, culture, language, and beliefs. A Carthaginian sailor could tell stories about the temples of Egypt, the bustling markets of Greece, and even the cold beaches of the north. For them, the world was not a closed wall, but an endless circle, where all were connected by the sea, the workshops of fire and wind. Behind this prosperity were the bustling workshops in Carthage. Here, fires burned day and night. Blacksmiths with sturdy bodies hammered incessantly, turning rough bronze blocks into weapons, tools, and exquisite items. The shipyards were just as busy. The sounds of saws, chisels, and hammers merged with the sound of the waves, like a sea shanty. The Carthaginians viewed shipbuilding as an art. They understood that a ship was not just a vehicle, but a mobile home that carried the soul of the city out to sea. Each piece of cedar wood was carefully selected, planed smooth, and joined meticulously, so that when the ship went to sea, it could withstand both storms and time. Belief and connection. What made Carthage different was its belief in connection. The Carthaginians did not seek to conquer to rule, but to conquer to connect. Each new trading post opened was a new friend in the vast network. They made treaties with local tribes, exchanging not only goods, but also culture. Some scholars believe that it was through this skill that Carthage created a stable network of relationships stretching from North Africa across the Mediterranean to the Atlantic. From then on, Carthage was not just a city. It became a pulse, a convergence point for all voices, all cultures. At the port, one could hear 10 different languages, but all merged into a common melody, the melody of trade and life. The philosophical breath of the sea. The sea did not only teach the Carthaginians about navigation, The sea taught them patience, as the waves lapped the shore tirelessly. The sea taught them humility, as a storm could sink the largest ship. And the sea also taught them about connection, that all waters eventually meet, just as all civilizations intersect through trade routes. Perhaps that is why the Carthaginians wrote less about philosophy than the Greeks. But in every word they spoke, every action they took, there was a deep philosophy of life. We are but guests of the sea. Let us treat it as a gentle friend, not an enemy. The mark of time. Viewed from afar, Carthage at this time was like a white gem on the shore of a blue sea. Its city walls shone under the noon sun, and the harbor was crowded with ships coming and going. But if you got closer, you would see the calluses on the sailors' hands, the faded paint on the ships' hulls, the marks left by time, a testament to the resilience of an entire people. On Barca Hill, where Princess Dido first set foot, the wind still blew as it did in the beginning. The elderly often came here at sunset, telling their grandchildren about the great voyages, about how Carthage had reached out to all four corners of the world. And when the moon rose, its gentle light covering the sea, Carthage seemed to be immersed in a dream that the sea and people wrote together. Carthage, the gem of the Mediterranean. Carthage, the gem of the Mediterranean. Carthage grew ever stronger, like a young tree with deep roots in the earth, its branches reaching out to sea. Each arriving ship brought not only goods, but stories of distant lands. The Carthaginians, from their earliest days, never ceased to expand their horizons. From the harbor where ships awaited the wind, Carthaginian merchants looked toward Spain, where the sun set in a fiery red like an invitation. The land of Iberia was where silver flowed from the earth, tin was mined from the mountains, and oak trees grew lush and green. Soon, Carthaginian trading posts sprang up along the Iberian coast, like the footprints of a maritime empire on a path of conquest through commerce. The harbor, where all languages joined in rhythm. The port of Carthage was like a grand stage where all cultures met. On an afternoon, you might see a Greek merchant in a white robe, holding a roll of silk. Next to him, an Egyptian with a gold necklace and a strange fragrance. Further on, people from Gaul, carrying animal hides and mead. Different languages merged into a strange chorus, the long drawl of Greek, the rhythmic cadence of Egyptian, the strong tones of Libyan. But all were connected by the language of goods, gold, silver, and trust. In that harbor, contracts were not only signed with writing, but with a handshake and a look in the eye. Carthage had created its own rules of the game for trade, where reputation was more important than an oath. The ships that traversed time. Each Carthaginian ship was a work of art. Cedar wood from Lebanon, tightly woven ropes, sails made of soft linen. The bow of the ship was often carved with the image of a sea god or the moon, a symbol of protection. The merchant ships were large and wide, designed to carry heavy cargo, from jars of olive oil as big as a child to gleaming silver ingots. Alongside them were the galleys, fast and agile, protecting the merchant convoys from pirates. The Carthaginians did not like war, but they understood that trade needed to be protected by strength. It was perhaps for this reason that the Carthaginian fleet soon became one of the most formidable forces in the Western Mediterranean. Sardinia, Corsica, and the sea bridges Carthage did not only reach Spain. Sardinia and Corsica, two large islands in the middle of the Mediterranean, also became strategic stops. There, the Carthaginians established trading posts, built harbors, and created a network to supply food for long sea voyages. Sardinia, with its fertile land, provided wheat and livestock. Corsica, with its dense forests, provided wood and pine resin, essentials for shipbuilding. The sea routes between Carthage, Sardinia, Corsica, and Spain became the lifeblood of the empire, sending goods out and bringing prosperity home. The shadow of Greece on the horizon. But on this path of expansion, Carthage soon recognized a rival: Greece. The Greek city-states, especially Syracuse and Sicily, were not only skilled merchants, but also seasoned warriors. Sicily, located between Carthage and the Italian peninsula, became the contested jewel of both civilizations. Initially, Carthage and Greece traded in peace, but trade, like the sea, always has undercurrents. As the route through Sicily became more important, conflict was inevitable. Nevertheless, at this stage, Carthage still held to the philosophy of trade first, fight later. They strengthened their trade network, fortified their ports, and learned naval techniques from their rivals. The city and culture, a world of its own. Within Carthage, cultural life also flourished. The Carthaginians organized harvest festivals where the sound of drums and flutes mingled with the sound of the waves. They painted images of the sea, the sun, and departing ships on their walls. Carthaginian children learned to swim before they learned to write. The sea was their first teacher, teaching them about hardship, how to read the stars and the direction of the wind. Adults often told children stories of their ancestors' voyages, like the story of Princess Dido, a lesson in courage and wisdom. The philosophy of commerce. For Carthage, trade was not just a material exchange. It was a way of communicating with the world. Each crate of goods, each contract, was like a door opening to a new relationship. The Carthaginians believed that when people traded with each other, they exchanged not only goods, but also culture, dreams, and even destiny. In the meetings of the Council of Elders, merchants often discussed the winds of the economy and strategy. They believed that a sustainable empire was not built on a large army, but on the trust of its partners. This was what helped Carthage become the largest trade hub in the Western Mediterranean. The voice of the night sea. As night fell, Carthage grew quiet again. In the harbor, only the sound of waves and the flickering of oil lamps remained. A sailor sat playing a harp, singing songs of home, of the sea, and of the purple roads that connected the world. The sea listened and responded with lapping waves. Carthage seemed to be dreaming of foreign lands, new markets, and harbors where no foot had ever trod. The footsteps to the Atlantic. Footsteps to the Atlantic. The Carthaginians did not stop at the Mediterranean. The desire for exploration was like a fire in their chests. Ships from Carthage passed through the Strait of Gibraltar, which they called the Gate of the Gods, to enter the vast and mysterious ocean. The Atlantic was not like the Mediterranean. There, the waves were larger and the winds fiercer, the sky so vast it seemed to swallow everything. But the Carthaginians were not afraid. They learned to listen to the rhythm of the wind, observe the color of the water, and the flocks of seagulls to find their way. These voyages brought back tin from the distant land of Britain, gold and amber items from the Baltic region, and strange stories of lands not yet named on any map. Carthage became the bridge connecting civilizations that never met directly, like an invisible network weaving a garment for the ancient world. The Council of Elders, the heartbeat of commerce. Within the city, Carthage was governed by the Council of Elders, seasoned merchants who understood the sea and the laws of trade. They were not warriors on horseback like in other empires, but strategic planners who used their minds and sharp wits to keep Carthage standing against all challenges. In their meetings, the sound of debate echoed in the stone chamber. On the table were rolls of nautical charts, price lists of goods, and small stones used as symbols for trade routes. They discussed wheat from Sardinia, silver from Spain, wood from Corsica, and how to deal with their Greek rivals on the island of Sicily. For them, war was always the last resort. Carthage existed because of trade, and trade could only flourish in peace. But if forced, they were ready to protect their economic lifeblood with warships and soldiers hired from the Numidian, Iberian, and Gallic tribes. The festivals of seasons and winds Carthage had special days dedicated to honoring the sea. The spring festival was a time when the whole city seemed to awaken. Oil lamps were hung in every street, purple and blue cloths were stretched along the harbor, and priests led processions to the Temple of Tanit. They burned fragrant incense from pine resin and sandalwood, so the white smoke curled up like a prayer sent to the gods. Ancient songs were sung, not rushed, but slow like the rhythm of the waves. Children ran around, holding seashells like musical instruments, tapping them to the beat of the drums. The elderly retold the story of the great voyages and how Carthage was built from a single ox hide. On festival nights, the sea reflected the torchlight like another sky. Sailors, before setting sail, would cast wreaths of flowers into the sea, believing the sea would carry their prayers to Tanit and Baal Hammon. The night markets. After the festival, the Carthage night market opened like a dream. Oil lamps hung high, their golden light making the pottery vases, rolls of fabric, and even gemstones sparkle. The gentle sounds of harps and flutes filled the air. The Carthaginians loved to stop by the taverns, listen to stories from recently returned sailors, or try strange dishes with flavors from distant worlds. Perhaps in moments like these, Carthage was no longer a city, but a universe, where all sensations, sounds, and colors blended. Everyone there felt they were part of something larger, transcending the scope of time. The gray clouds from east and west. But the sea did not only bring goods and joy, it also brought challenges. From the east, the Persian Empire expanded, threatening the trade routes. From the west, Greece began to expand its power in Sicily. Carthage understood that if they wanted to continue their dream of trade, they needed not only to trade, but also to keep the sea, to keep the purple roads always open. This was when Carthage began to build a powerful navy, not to protect territory, but to protect the trade network, like a constantly beating heart. Each Carthaginian warship was built not with an air of threat, but as a guardian of the sea, ensuring the safety of merchant voyages. The stories of wind and waves. There is a story that a Carthaginian sailor once traveled to the distant seas of West Africa, where the wind carried a strange scent and the waves were as dark green as jade. He returned and said, "The sea never runs out of stories, only people are not patient enough to listen." These stories spread in the taverns along the port, where sailors gathered after each trip. They told of fierce storms, of nights spent watching the stars to find their direction, and of moments when the sea was as calm as glass, making one feel as if they were floating in a dream. The aspiration to reach. Farther Carthage was now not just a city, but a network. It connected hundreds of small ports, thousands of people from many different cultures, and above all, it was a symbol of the aspiration to go beyond, the aspiration that the sea was not a barrier, but a road connecting the world. The Carthaginians knew that one day they would have to face other great civilizations, Rome, Greece, not just with goods, but with will and strength. But for the present moment, Carthage remained peaceful, like a shimmering drop of water between the sea and sky, dreaming purple dreams that stretched to the horizon. There were mornings in Carthage when one could feel that the wind was not just the breath of the sky, but the whisper of the gods. The wind blew through the harbor, swept over the red-tiled roofs, snaked into the narrow alleys, and finally merged with the flames burning in the temples. The port of Carthage, where wind and fire met, was not only the center of commerce, but also the sacred heart of the entire city. The fire that never dies. On Barca Hill, the fire in the Temple of Tanit burned day and night. The Carthaginians believed that as long as that fire burned, Carthage would never fall. Tanit, the goddess of the moon, of motherhood, and of fertility, was seen as the protective mother for every ship that set sail. Beside her was Baal Hammon, the god of the sun and the harvest. Baal was the fire, the light of the wheat fields and olive groves. Every morning, before the first ship set sail, the priests would offer Baal Hammon and Tanit drops of wine, the fragrance of sandalwood, and silent prayers. The Carthaginians viewed their temples as a place connecting heaven and sea, where people sent their thanks and their fears to the forces they could not see. The fire burning in the temple was like a heart, not just a symbol of faith, but the very pulse of the city. The harbor, the breath of the city. The harbor of Carthage was a marvel that few places in the ancient world could match. 2 circular ports, one for commerce, one for the military, were like the 2 lungs of the city, inhaling and exhaling with the rhythm of the wind and waves. The commercial port was vast, where cargo ships from all over the Mediterranean docked. The sound of wooden wheels rolling on the piers, the cries of vendors, the rustle of silk, the clatter of crates, all merged into a chaotic but vibrant symphony. The military port was another world, perfectly circular, with a small island in the center, where the naval admirals supervised all naval operations. Each warship was built like a masterpiece. The Carthaginians considered warships not just as tools of protection, but as symbols of the city's strength and wisdom. The architecture and the lively streets Carthage was built like a dream. White stone walls rose high, both for protection and to reflect the sunlight. Inside, the streets were paved with stone, clean, and always filled with fragrances, the scent of olive oil, spices, and freshly baked bread. Carthaginian houses often had an inner courtyard, where families gathered in the afternoon under the shade of olive or fig trees. On the walls were simple yet elegant mosaics, depicting the sea, ships, and the gods. At night, the light from the oil lamps in the houses merged with the moonlight, making Carthage look like a giant star on the shore of the Mediterranean. Religion in every breath. What was special about Carthage was that religion was not separate from daily life. It permeated every activity, from setting sail to eating dinner. Every family had a small altar dedicated to Tanit. Before leaving home, a Carthaginian would often touch a small statue or a stone carved with the moon's image, as if to ask for protection. On major festival days, the entire city flowed like a river towards the Temple of Tanit. People brought flowers, fruits, wine, and prayers. The sound of drum music echoed through the streets, not fast, not slow, like the steady, deep rhythm of the sea. On some festival nights, the harbor was as bright as day with hundreds of torches lit. The wind from the sea blew in, making the flames dance, as if the whole city was breathing in unison with the earth and sky. The sounds of life. Carthage was never quiet. In the morning, the sound of waves merged with the clang of blacksmiths' hammers, the opening of the market, and the calls of children running down the streets. At noon, the air was thick with the aroma of olive oil, bread, and spices from the market. In the afternoon, bronze bells from the harbor announced the return of ships, followed by cheers as goods were unloaded. At night, Carthage became a different world. The waves were quieter, the wind blew through the stone columns, and music from the taverns along the streets sounded like a lullaby. Sometimes, from a distance, you could hear prayers as soft as the wind, whispers sent to the gods to protect the city through the long night. Art, the touches of the soul. The Carthaginians did not build colossal wonders like the Egyptians, but their art possessed an intimate, refined beauty. From pottery vases painted with sea waves to jewelry carved with the moon and stars, everything exuded a love for the sea and respect for nature. Carthaginian artisans often worked in small workshops. They believed that each product had a breath. A necklace, a pottery vase, a piece of cloth, all carried a story, a soul. When selling to a customer, they would always say, "This item will bring you luck," for it was made with hands and heart. The philosophy of wind and fire. Carthage learned to live with wind and fire, the two most important elements of the sea and the city. The wind carried their ships out to sea, and fire kept the city warm and full of hope. The Carthaginians believed that only when wind and fire were in harmony would the city prosper. This philosophy may sound simple, but it was the guiding principle for every decision. In trade, they let the wind guide them, accepting changes as they accepted the waves. In life, they kept fire in their hearts, the fire of family, of faith, and of resilience. The circular harbor. The heart of Carthage. The circular military harbor of Carthage was considered by many to be an artificial wonder, second to none in the ancient world. Viewed from above, the port looked like a giant eye of the sea, always open to observe and protect the city. In the center was a small island, where the naval admirals worked. From there, they could see every ship coming and going. Surrounding it were cleverly designed docks, enough for hundreds of warships to anchor, ready to depart at any moment. But despite being a military structure, the circular harbor still had a peaceful appearance when there was no war. During the day, sunlight shone on the water, reflecting the gleaming wooden oars. At night, the port was like a circle of light, where hundreds of oil lamps illuminated the water, creating a sparkling picture that made anyone returning from afar feel warm. The streets that breathed with the sea. If you strolled through Carthage in the early morning, you would feel the city's pulse in every small alley. The stone-paved streets led from Barca Hill down to the harbor, where every gust of wind brought the smell of salt and olive oil. Taverns opened their doors from morning, welcoming sailors who had just docked after a long journey. The cries of vendors echoed through the streets, red wine from Iberia, purple cloth from Tyre, fragrant spices from Arabia. Amidst these sounds were the calls of children playing, the creak of wooden wheels on the road, and the chime of bronze bells signaling work hours in the workshops. Carthage was not just a city, it was a living universe, where every citizen, every merchant, every artisan was an indispensable part. The festivals of the sea and moon. Whenever the harvest was bountiful or voyages returned safely, the Carthaginians held a festival. The festival was not only to thank the gods, but also to connect everyone. The Temple of Tanit was where the festival began. Thousands of torches were lit, and incense smoke billowed. The sound of drums and flutes echoed through the streets, slow like the rhythm of the waves. The people of Carthage wore their finest clothes, full of colors and patterns inspired by the sea and the sky. During the festival, the Carthaginians offered wine and bread to Tanit and Baal Hammon. Sailors told stories of new lands, and merchants exchanged tales of distant ports. As night fell, everyone gathered by the beach, releasing small lanterns onto the sea, as if sending thanks to the wind and waves that had protected them. The sacred flame and the rituals. In every Carthaginian temple, the flame was considered the soul of the city. It burned day and night, tended by the firekeepers. They were men of few words, but their eyes shone as if they could see the future. Whenever a ship left port, a portion of ash from the sacred flame was placed on the bow, like a protective amulet. The rituals were not loud, but gentle and solemn. They were not just pleas, but a way for the Carthaginians to remind themselves of their smallness before the sea, and that only through respect could they survive the storms of fate. Carthaginian architecture, a simple but enduring beauty. The architecture of Carthage was not as ornate as that of Athens or Rome, but it had its own character. Sturdy white stone walls surrounded the city. Inside, houses were built of baked brick, with inner courtyards, where olive or fig trees grew. The roofs were covered with red tiles, and many houses had open verandas overlooking the sea. Public buildings such as markets, shipyards, and temples were located along the main axis, creating a connection between commerce and faith. The Carthaginians believed that a prosperous city was one where merchants, artisans, and priests lived like brothers, sharing the breath of the sea. The people, the soul of Carthage. The Carthaginians were not just merchants and sailors. They were people who knew how to listen to the sea and read the wind. A Carthaginian could look at the sky and know a storm was coming the next day, or smell the wind to guess the direction. Carthaginian women played a significant role. They managed households, conducted business in the markets, and wove the purple fabric sought after by the entire world. Many women were also priestesses, tending the sacred flame and leading rituals. Carthaginian children grew up in an environment of sea and sun. From a young age, they learned to swim, to row, and to hear stories about Princess Dido, who taught them that courage and wisdom were more powerful than force. Carthage at night. When night fell, Carthage became a different picture. The harbor was bathed in the light of hundreds of oil lamps. The sea breeze carried the scent of salt and the murmur of waves, like a lullaby from the past. Taverns along the port were lit, where sailors told stories of their journeys through Sardinia, Corsica, and as far as Spain. On Barca Hill, the Temple of Tanit glowed, reflecting the moonlight on its white stone roof. The elderly sat on their porches, telling children stories about the sea gods and the talking winds. Carthage at night was not noisy, but quiet, like a slowly flowing river, embracing all stories and memories. The philosophy of the harbor. The harbor of Carthage was a crossroads for everything: people, cultures, and beliefs. The Carthaginians believed that every ship that set sail was a seed. It could return with treasure, or it could vanish into the sea, but every journey had meaning. The port of Carthage was not just a place for exchanging goods, but a place where people learned patience, unity, and respect for nature. They believed that only when wind and fire, the two symbols of the city, remained in harmony would Carthage continue to prosper. The rituals of sea and wind. Every time a large ship prepared to set sail, the entire harbor of Carthage seemed to hold its breath for a moment. The Carthaginians believed that a long journey began not only with human preparation, but also required the consent of the sea and wind. The priest in the Temple of Tanit would stand on high, raising his hands towards the sea, praying silently in an ancient language that only the chosen could understand. Then, a torch lit from the sacred fire in the temple would be brought to the ship's bow. That fire would be kept throughout the journey as a reminder that the city was always with the sailors, even when they were in the most distant places. Music, the soul. Hidden behind every wave. Carthaginian music was not elaborate, but it was rich in rhythm and emotion. Their sea shanties were often long lullabies, as slow as the rhythm of rowing. On festival nights, the sound of leather drums echoed from the harbor to Barca Hill, merging with the sounds of flutes and harps, creating a sound like the wind passing through stone columns. An old song told, "We are the salt in the sea, we are the wind in the night. If the sea roars, we will listen. If the wind is silent, we will sing for the sky." These melodies were not just music, but memory. It reminded the Carthaginians that they and the sea were one, inseparable. Mosaic art, stories told with stone and color. In Carthaginian houses and temples, mosaic art was found everywhere. Small stones of blue, purple, and white were pieced together to form images of waves, dolphins, seagulls, and the face of Tanit. Each mosaic was a story, a wish for peace and prosperity. The Carthaginians did not decorate merely for beauty, but to tell their story. When you entered a Carthaginian house, you could read the family's history through the mosaics on the floor. Perhaps the image of a ship their ancestors had sailed, or the symbol of the god they believed in. Jewelry and refinement. Carthaginian women loved jewelry, but not in an ostentatious way. They often wore silver bracelets carved with moon symbols, or amber necklaces that shone golden in the sun. Carthaginian jewelers were famous for their ability to combine precious stones with silver and bronze, creating items that were both exquisite and spiritually significant. Each piece of jewelry was considered a lucky charm. A bracelet was not just for beauty, but also carried a prayer to protect its owner on their journeys. Daily life and a humanistic philosophy. The Carthaginians lived simply, but with great pride. In the morning, they worked in the fields, in the workshops, or at the harbor. In the afternoon, they gathered with their families, enjoying baked bread, olives, and wine. At night, they listened to the elderly tell stories about the early days of the city, about Princess Dido and her brave journey. The Carthaginian philosophy of life was simple. Every day must be like a sea voyage, sometimes with favorable winds, sometimes with storms, but always moving forward. It was this steadfastness that made Carthage increasingly strong, becoming a bright spot in the Mediterranean network. The role of the sea in the Carthaginian soul. The sea was not just a means of livelihood, but an endless source of inspiration. The sea taught them patience while waiting for the wind to change, courage when facing storms, and humility before the power of nature. Carthaginian children learned this from a young age. They were taught that the sea is the greatest teacher. Every wave that crashed on the shore was like a new lesson, sometimes gentle, sometimes fierce, but always carrying a message. Therefore, the Carthaginians never underestimated the sea. They listened to it as they would listen to a wise old friend. Stories passed down through generations. The legend of Princess Dido was still told through many generations. Whenever the wind from the sea blew strongly at night, the elderly would tell the children, "Dido did not build Carthage with just earth and stone. She built it with her heart. We must live worthy of that." Besides Dido, there were stories of Carthaginian sailors who dared to venture further than anyone, setting foot in seas where the sun was fiery red and strange stars had never been named. These stories inspired later generations that the world never ends at the horizon. The harbor at night, a wordless symphony. When all the work was done, the harbor of Carthage sank into a gentle quietness. The waves lapped silently on the shore, the sea breeze blew through the wooden posts, making the small flags flutter. From a distance, the light from the torches in the Temple of Tanit shone on the sea, creating a faint path of light as if leading straight to the sky. Sailors often sat by the shore, watching the moonlight and sipping wine. They listened to the sea as if it were telling its own stories, stories with no end, only the endless flow of time. The sea brought not only goods and stories, it also brought new figures. One day, as Carthaginian ships sailed the deep blue sea, they encountered other sails, white as clouds, bearing the symbols of Greek city-states. That was when Carthage realized that its purple path was not just a commercial journey, but a stage where civilizations would meet. Sicily, the jewel of the Mediterranean. Sicily, located between Carthage and the Italian peninsula, was an island embraced by the sea like a jewel. There, Mount Etna puffed white smoke daily as a reminder that beneath the earth, fire was smoldering. The Carthaginians knew that whoever controlled Sicily would control the sea route between the eastern and western Mediterranean. In the early days, Carthage came to Sicily not to conquer, but to trade. They set up trading posts, exchanging oil, wine, and metals. But the Greeks also saw Sicily's potential, and they began to arrive, bringing with them philosophers, artists, and warriors. Sicily quickly became a meeting point for two worlds, Punic and Greek. Greek cities like Syracuse grew strong, building harbors, markets, and temples to gods like Athena and Apollo. From afar, Carthage looked at Sicily as if looking at a mirror reflecting its own ambitions. The shadow of Greece in commerce. The Greeks were famous for their fast ships and sophisticated seafaring techniques. They also traded, but in a different style from Carthage. While Carthage was calm, focusing on trade networks and sustainability, Greece was dynamic and fiercely competitive. They brought fragrant wine, exquisitely painted pottery, and stories of the gods on Mount Olympus. In the markets of Sicily, Carthaginian and Greek merchants met, exchanging not only goods, but also culture. The Carthaginians learned to carve stone with exquisite detail from the Greeks, while the Greeks were fascinated by the wave patterns and moon symbols characteristic of Carthage. But in this exchange, there was an undercurrent of competition. Who would control this island? The winds of politics. Carthage favored peace, but they understood that trade only prospered when routes were protected. When the Greeks began to build fortified cities and seize control of strategic ports in Sicily, Carthage was forced to make a choice: either stand by and watch, or protect its own lifeline. The Council of Elders in Carthage met for many days. In the light of oil lamps and the sound of the waves outside the window, the merchants discussed the city's future. Some said that Carthage should continue to negotiate and cooperate with the Greeks. Others argued that if they lost Sicily, Carthage would lose the key to the Mediterranean. Finally, a decision was made. Carthage would strengthen its presence in Sicily, but they would do so not by immediately starting a war, but through skill, building more trading posts, allying with native tribes, and gradually expanding their influence. The fire in Carthage's heart. The Carthaginians believed that every challenge was like a sea voyage in a storm. The key was not to fight the storm, but to learn to ride with it. They did not immediately confront the Greeks, but they never stopped preparing. The harbor of Carthage was busier than ever. Shipbuilders worked through the night, creating ships that were both fast and sturdy. Artisans forged exquisite weapons, not for show, but to be ready if needed. In the Temple of Tanit, the fire burned brighter than ever, as if to tell everyone that the time of testing had arrived. Cultural crossroads. Despite the competition, Carthage and Greece still influenced each other. Carthaginian architects began experimenting with Doric and Ionic columns, while Greek artisans were captivated by the wave patterns and moon symbols characteristic of Carthage. On the island of Sicily, there were markets where you could hear a mixture of two languages, Punic and Greek, in the same story. Punic children played with Greek children, learning each other's songs. But beneath this peaceful appearance, an undercurrent was rising, signaling inevitable conflicts. The sails, heralding change. One morning, from the top of Barca hill, people saw Greek sails appear on the horizon, not coming to trade, but to demand their position. It was the first sign that Carthage could no longer be just a peaceful merchant. The Carthaginian council realized that to protect their purple road, they needed to change. From here, Carthage began to write a new chapter in its history, a chapter not only of wind and commerce, but also of the fire of war. A reflection on this moment. If you listened to the wind blowing through Carthage at that time, you would feel something different. The wind carried not only the scent of sea salt, but also the scent of challenge. Carthage stood at a major crossroads, either accept being overshadowed by Greece, or step out of its commercial shell to become a true power. However, Carthage was not hasty. They continued to trade, still sang their sea shanties, and still kept the sacred flame burning brightly in the Temple of Tanit. But in the eyes of the blacksmith, the sailor, and even in the prayers of the mother by the harbor, there was a silent preparation for a new era. Sicily, where two worlds intersected. Sicily, where two worlds intersected. Sicily was not just an island with a strategic location, it was a place where two civilizations, Punic and Greek, intertwined like two underground streams. The Carthaginians built trading posts along the coast, where merchant ships docked to exchange goods for wheat, honey, and local products. They established small harbors, protected by low walls, and from there sent goods back to Carthage. The Greeks, especially from city-states like Corinth and Athens, did not stand still. They brought immigrants, merchants, and philosophers to Sicily, building Greek-style cities with white stone temples, public squares, and bustling markets. The city of Syracuse, with its natural harbor and massive stone walls, quickly became the lighthouse of Greece in the western Mediterranean. The winds of competition. Initially, Carthage and Greece coexisted on the island of Sicily like two cautious neighbors. They exchanged goods, Greek wine for Carthaginian purple cloth, olive oil for silver and tin. But as trade grew, the undercurrents of competition intensified. The Greek city-states, with their ambition for colonial expansion, began to build military fleets to protect their merchant ships. They erected fortresses in key locations on the island. Carthage, with the shrewdness of a merchant, realized that if they let Greece dominate Sicily, the trade route from east to west would be choked. The secret meetings on Barca Hill. On bright moonlit nights, the Council of Elders of Carthage met on Barca Hill. The atmosphere in the meeting room was thick, with only the sound of the waves from the sea outside. The veteran merchants, who had once crossed oceans, now had to discuss military strategy, something Carthage had always avoided. One said, "We are people of the sea. We have never started a war." Another replied, "But if we do not protect our roots, we will lose everything. Trade cannot exist under the shadow of another's sword." Finally, a decision was made. Carthage would build a strategic fleet to protect Sicily, but they would do so skillfully, combining it with diplomacy and alliances with native tribes. Alliances with the Sicilian tribes. Sicily was not only home to Greeks and Carthaginians, there were also native tribes like the Elymians and Sicanians. Carthage, with its merchant experience, knew how to befriend these tribes. They exchanged goods, taught them how to build small boats, and even recruited the sons of tribal leaders as mercenaries. These tribes, who were looked down upon by the Greeks, saw Carthage as a reliable ally. Little by little, Carthage created a network of alliances, not as dazzling as the Greeks, but resilient and practical. The unfired strategy. The Carthaginians did not rush to build high walls or erect monuments like the Greeks. They quietly fortified their ports, expanded their warehouses, and built faster warships. On every trading voyage, they sent along warriors hired from Numidia, famous for their horsemanship and flexible fighting skills. Although there were no major battles, minor clashes occurred. Once, a Carthaginian merchant ship was stopped off the coast by the Syracuse fleet. The confrontation lasted only a few minutes, but it was enough for Carthage to realize the era of trading on trust alone was over. The light and shadow of Syracuse, the jewel of Greece and Sicily, was where Carthage saw the challenge most clearly. The harbor of Syracuse was vast, filled with warships and bustling with trade. Carthaginian merchants reported that from a distance, Syracuse shone like a star fallen into the sea, with the temple of Athena towering on the hill. But that light was also a warning. Syracuse was not just a city of merchants. They were warriors, and Greek warriors did not easily back down before any opponent. Carthage prepares for the great wind. In Carthage, the atmosphere grew more solemn. Blacksmiths worked day and night forging weapons, and new galleys were built with bronze-tipped prows ready to ram enemy ships. Carthaginian merchants, accustomed to negotiations, now learned to read military maps and calculate not just wind direction, but battle formations. However, amidst all these preparations, Carthage maintained its identity, never forgetting that the sea was a friend, not an enemy. They still sang their sea shanties, still lit oil lamps for Tanit, praying that war would not come too soon. The whisper of history. On quiet nights, when the sea breeze blew through Carthage, many wondered, are we still the Carthage of Dido, or are we becoming a new empire? The answer lay in the heart of the city itself. Carthage did not change its soul. Even if they had to fight, they were still people of the sea, still merchants, still those who believed that connection was stronger than division. The first clashes in Sicily. History often does not begin with a thunderclap, but with small ripples. In Sicily, those ripples came from trade disputes. A convoy of Carthaginian merchant ships, carrying purple cloth and silver, was stopped by a fleet from Syracuse. Words were exchanged, arguments over control of the seas, then a spear was unexpectedly pointed, and conflict erupted. It was not a major battle, just a minor skirmish between a few ships, but it made both Carthage and Greece realize that Sicily would not be large enough for both their ambitions. Carthage, from merchant to guardian of the sea. The Council of Elders in Carthage met for many days after this event. The merchants who once only cared about the price of silver and tin now had to discuss battle fleets, tactics, and ships that needed reinforcement. An elderly merchant said slowly, "We do not love war, but if the sea is no longer safe, we must become its guardians." So Carthage began to build a strong military fleet. Two-tiered galleys were designed to be both fast and durable. The hulls were fitted with bronze-tipped prows, a warhead that could tear through an enemy ship's hull with a single impact. Carthaginian sailors, who were seasoned seafarers, now became true warriors. The mercenary warriors Carthage had a distinctive feature. They had few native troops, instead hiring soldiers from many lands. The swift Numidian cavalry from the North African desert, the strong Iberians with their curved swords, and the tall, bold Gallic mercenaries. These warriors, upon arriving in Carthage, saw not just a prosperous city, but felt its soul, a soul that did not want war, but if forced, would fight to the end. A dialogue between two civilizations. Before war truly broke out, Carthage and Syracuse still tried to negotiate. Carthaginian ambassadors brought purple cloth, silver, and wine to Syracuse, trying to persuade them that mutual trade was more beneficial than bloodshed. But history often does not heed the advice of peacemakers. The ambition of Syracuse, combined with the pride of Carthage, made agreement difficult. Sometimes stories of the gods were even brought up as justification, that Athena and Tanit could not share the same sea. Tense days in Carthage. In the city, the atmosphere grew heavy. The harbor was still bustling, but stories about goods had given way to rumors about the Greek fleet. Blacksmiths worked day and night. The first Carthaginian warships set sail to patrol the waters around Sicily. Carthaginian children were taught new songs, not just about the sea and wind, but about courage and protecting their homeland. The elderly prayed more, lighting more oil lamps in the Temple of Tanit, hoping the gods would guide Carthage through the challenge. The small battle off the Sardinian Sea. A major incident occurred when a Greek fleet, passing through the waters near Sardinia, an area controlled by Carthage, refused to pay port fees. The confrontation turned into a small naval battle. Carthaginian warships, with their gleaming bronze prows, charged, shattering the Greek ship hulls like a storm tearing through cloth. It was the first victory for the Carthaginian fleet, and also a statement that Carthage was no longer just a trading city. A philosophical breath amidst the storm. Despite the victory, the Carthaginians remained calm. They did not sing loud victory hymns, but quietly thanked the sea. In the Temple of Tanit, the fire burned brighter, as a reminder that true strength lies not in war, but in the ability to protect life. A priest said, "The sea does not distinguish who is right or wrong. It only respects those who know how to listen and respect it." That saying became Carthage's motto during this turbulent period. Sicily, the battlefield of the future. As the shadow of Greece grew larger in Sicily, Carthage knew that a major battle was only a matter of time. But instead of just preparing weapons, they continued to invest in trade, strengthening alliances with Sicilian and Numidian tribes. They believed that a city that could stand on its economy and faith would be stronger than one that relied only on sword and spear. There were days when the Mediterranean Sea was no longer just a path for goods and peaceful songs. The waves, once as gentle as a lullaby, began to echo with the sounds of conflict. Carthage, the child of wind and fire, realized that to protect its dream of trade, it could not live by agreements alone. Sword and commerce now stood side by side on the same ship. The windy seasons of Change Carthage once prided itself on being a city of merchants, of endless sea voyages. But since Greece appeared in Sicily with its war fleet, the winds had changed direction. Every time a Carthaginian ship set sail, it carried not only goods, but also a worry. Was there a spear waiting for them out there in the open sea? In the meetings on Barca Hill, the Council of Elders looked to the west, where the horizon was covered by Greek sails. A great question was posed. Can we protect our dream with promises, or must we forge more swords? The fleet, from dream to reality. Previously, Carthage built ships to carry oil, purple cloth, and spices. Now, they began to build warships. The shipyards by the harbor operated day and night. Wood from Corsica and Sardinia was brought in, shaped, planed, and joined into galleys as fast as the wind. Each Carthaginian warship had a bronze prow, a solid bronze-clad front, capable of ramming an enemy ship's hull like a giant swordfish. Carthaginian sailors were trained not only to steer, but to coordinate rhythmically like an orchestra. Each oar stroke was a heartbeat of the city. Weapons and the art of war Carthage knew not only how to trade, they also knew how to make exquisite weapons. In the forges, fires burned a fiery red. Carthaginian blacksmiths forged curved swords, gleaming spearheads, and sharp arrows made from Iberian steel. But even when making weapons, the Carthaginians maintained the air of artisans. They carved wave patterns on swords, moon symbols on shields, as if to remind that weapons were also part of the story of wind and fire, not just for killing. Mercenaries, the hired protectors. A unique feature of Carthage was that they did not have a large native army. The people of Carthage were mostly merchants, artisans, and sailors. Therefore, to protect their routes, they hired warriors from all over. Numidian cavalry from the desert, strong Iberian soldiers with double-edged swords, and even slingers from the Balearic Islands, famous for their accurate stone throwing. These warriors brought many cultural colors to Carthage. In the afternoons, you could see Numidians riding horses on the beach, Iberians practicing sword dances under the shadow of stone columns, and Balearic slingers honing their skills by shattering pottery jars hung on posts. Carthage and the lessons from Greece. Carthage prepared not only with strength, but also by learning from its rival. They sent people to observe Greek shipbuilding techniques and learn how to maneuver warships in naval combat. From Syracuse, they learned about coordinating warships and infantry. From Athens, they learned how to organize large fleets. However, Carthage always maintained its own identity. They did not emulate empires that wanted to conquer all. Instead, they wanted to create a safety net around their trade routes. Their philosophy was clear. We fight not to dominate, but to trade in freedom. Night drills on the sea. A common sight at sunset was the Carthaginian fleet setting out for drills. Dozens of galleys lined up like arrows, their oars hitting the water in unison, creating a deep, powerful sound like drums. The admiral stood on the deck, observing and giving orders. At night, lanterns hung on each ship lit up, reflecting on the water like a second starry sky. On those nights, Carthage was like a mobile village on the sea, where merchants and warriors learned together how to protect their dream. Faith and spiritual strength Carthage knew that a ship could not sail on wind alone, but also on faith. Before each voyage, the priest in the Temple of Tanit performed a ceremony. The sacred fire burned brightly, and handfuls of salt and olive blossoms were scattered into the sea as a prayer. Carthaginian sailors believed that Tanit and Baal Hammon accompanied them on every voyage. They carved small symbols on the mast, hung amulets made of seashells and precious stones as a reminder that every wave was a test from the gods. A moment of reflection. A Carthaginian merchant once wrote in his diary, "We are no longer the Carthage of the early days, only knowing how to trade and sing by the harbor. We have learned to hold a sword, but I hope that the heart of Carthage will forever belong to the sea, not to war." That statement echoed as a message to future generations. Even as it became a military power, Carthage must never forget that it was a child of commerce and the sea. The Carthaginian fleet, seabirds of wood and bronze. In these years, the harbor of Carthage was like a giant nursery for warships. The shipyards bustled with the sounds of chisels, hammers, and workers' rhythmic calls. Wood from the forests of Lebanon, Corsica, and Sardinia was brought in, treated with pine resin, and cut and joined into slender yet strong planks. Carthaginian naval engineers studied every detail, from the length of the oars to the angle of the prow. They created two-tiered galleys with long, slender hulls, both fast for pursuit and agile for maneuvering in narrow seas. Each ship was like a seabird, ready to dash through the waves. The prow was clad in bronze, called the warhead. It was like the sharp horn of a sea beast, capable of shattering an enemy ship's hull with a well-aimed ram. Under the sun, these bronze prows gleamed like dozens of giant swords, turning the harbor of Carthage into a picture that was both beautiful and majestic. Balearic slingers and Numidian cavalry. To protect its fleet, Carthage hired the best warriors from all over. The Balearic slingers, with their skill in throwing stones with slings from a great distance, could hit a target smaller than a palm. On the deck of a ship, they were a terror to any sailor who dared to approach. In addition, Carthage had the Numidian cavalry, famous for their small, fast horses, as agile as the desert wind. When ships docked in Sicily or Iberia, the Numidian cavalry were the vanguard, moving as fast as sandstorms. Iberia also supplied Carthage with brave warriors, with curved swords carved with strange patterns. They fought not just for money, but for honor and their bond with Carthage, the city that gave them work and glory. The harbor becomes a fortress. The harbor of Carthage was fortified like a floating fortress. The walls surrounding the military port were built high and strong. Inside, warehouses for weapons, warships, and provisions were always full. But miraculously, despite being militarized, the harbor of Carthage still retained the beauty of a commercial center. Alongside the warships were merchant ships carrying oil, wine, and cloth. Merchants and warriors walked side by side, like two bloodstreams nourishing the city. Carthage knew how to balance sword and commerce. That was the secret to their survival and growth. The first patrols. When the Carthaginian fleet was complete, patrols began. From the harbor, the fleet set sail, heading towards Sicily and Sardinia. Carthaginian sailors, accustomed to trade, now learned to operate in battle formation. They practiced ramming enemy ships, how to turn their ships quickly to attack from the flank. Carthaginian admirals, with their long years of maritime experience, turned the fleet into an orchestra of the waves. Each ship was like a musical note, coordinating harmoniously to create overall strength. Conflict on the high seas. It was not long before conflict with Greece and Sicily occurred again. A fleet from Syracuse tried to blockade the tin transport route from Iberia. Carthage sent its fleet to confront them. This time, they did not just defend themselves, they proactively deployed a new tactic. A team of light ships lured the enemy, while heavy warships circled around from both wings, trapping and destroying the Greek ships. The battle lasted all afternoon. When the sun set, the Carthaginian fleet was victorious. The intact ships returned to the harbor in the sunset, their oars dyed red by the fire-like light. The voice of the night sea. Despite the victory, Carthage did not celebrate with loud cheers. That night, when the ships docked, all the sailors went to the Temple of Tanit. They laid down their weapons, lit torches, and prayed that the sea had given them strength, but had also taken those who did not return. The sound of the waves that night seemed to slow down, as if the sea was also listening to the people's prayers. Carthage, though entering a period of militarization, did not forget its essence, a city of merchants that respected the sea and life. The art of balance. A precious thing was that Carthage did not let war overshadow commerce. Merchants still set sail, still expanded their network of trade. They believed that trade was the soul, while the sword was just the armor protecting that soul. On Barca Hill, whenever the wind blew from the sea, the elderly still told their grandchildren about the time of Princess Dido, when Carthage was a small city, living only on faith and skill. That story served as a reminder that no matter how powerful it became, Carthage must keep the soul of a sea lover, the counsels of wind and fire. As Carthage entered a phase of both trading and defending with the sword, the Council of Elders became the brain of the city. Meetings lasted for nights, where the flickering oil lamps illuminated hand-drawn nautical charts. On the stretched goatskins, trade routes appeared like red blood vessels, connecting Carthage with Sicily, Iberia, Sardinia, Corsica, and distant ports in Egypt and Asia Minor. In these meetings, merchants discussed not only prices, but also tactics. Which routes needed more escort ships? Which tribes in Sicily should be allied with to counter the pressure from Syracuse? How many warships and merchant ships did the new fleet need? Every decision was weighed like a chess game on the sea, not just to win, but to keep the sea a path of life, not a path of destruction. The Battle of Gela. A significant event that marked Carthage's military maturity was the battle off the coast of Gela, Sicily. A Carthaginian convoy carrying silver and purple cloth was intercepted by a Greek war fleet. Syracuse wanted to send a message that they were the keepers of the key to this sea. Carthage responded with a small but well-organized fleet. Instead of charging directly into the Greek formation, Carthage used a swallow's wing tactic. Some light ships lured the Greeks into pursuit, while heavy warships circled behind, attacking from both sides. As a result, several Greek ships were rammed and shattered, and the Carthaginian merchant convoy was saved. The Battle of Gela was not just a military victory, but a statement that Carthage had learned to speak the language of the sea, the language of tactics and wisdom. Merchants in times of war. What was special was that even as war loomed, Carthage did not let trade be disrupted. Carthaginian merchants still set sail, but with escort ships. They still brought wine, olive oil, silver, and purple cloth to distant ports, still signed new trade agreements. The Carthaginians believed that war was not the goal, but only a shield to protect the dream of commerce. Every silver coin they earned came not from the sword, but from ships returning full of goods. Carthage's military philosophy. If the Greeks saw war as a way to prove strength, Carthage saw war as an art of defense. They did not fight to conquer, but to keep the sea lanes open. Carthaginian admirals often told their sailors, "We are children of the sea. Fight as the sea fights. not loudly but with persistence and intelligence. They avoided prolonged direct confrontations, instead using the agility of their fleet to strike at the enemy's weaknesses. They also did not forget to maintain diplomatic relations with less extreme city-states, ready to share commercial benefits. The Festival of Firelight. One of the most beautiful moments in Carthage during this period was the Festival of Firelight. After each major victory at sea, the Carthaginians did not hold loud triumphs. They gathered at the harbor, lit hundreds of torches, and together released small wooden boats into the sea. On each boat were candles and flowers floating out to sea like sparkling stars on the water. This festival was not just to celebrate victory, but also to remember the sailors who did not return. Every family that lost a loved one was visited by the community, who brought food and told stories of the deceased. Carthage believed that a city was only truly strong when all hearts beat as one. A vision beyond war. Despite increasing pressure from Greece, Carthage did not allow itself to be drawn into a full-scale war. They continued to expand their trade routes to the coast of Spain, establishing new transit ports. In Iberia, Carthage built strong relationships with local tribes. They not only bought silver and tin, but also brought shipbuilding techniques, measurement systems, and knowledge of the stars. Carthaginian merchants became diplomats between cultures, helping Carthage grow not only economically, but also in spiritual influence. The Whisper on Barca Hill. One night, as the city slept peacefully, an old merchant sat on Barca Hill looking out at the sea. He said to his student, "We have learned to hold a sword, but let us not forget the reason we exist. The sword is temporary, but the sea is eternal. Remember that Carthage was born of the sea, and the sea does not like blood." Those words became a motto for many generations of Carthaginian merchants, a reminder that even as a military power, they must not forget their identity as a city of wind, fire, and commerce. There were days when the Mediterranean Sea was no longer just a mirror reflecting the sky. It became murky and heavy, as if hiding impending storms. Sicily, the jewel of the sea, was no longer a place for exchanging goods and culture, but a battlefield where two civilizations tested their strength and will. The beginning of the storm. For a long time, Carthage and the Greek city-states in Sicily had been quietly vying for position. But when Syracuse, under the leadership of ambitious warriors, declared control over the strategic ports on the island, Carthage was forced to respond. Merchant convoys were intercepted, and once peaceful routes were now steeped in tension. News from Sicily returned to Carthage like a hot wind. They have built higher walls. They have built more warships. They want to turn this sea into their sea. The Council of Elders knew it was time for Carthage to do more than just trade and pray. They needed to protect their commercial lifeblood with action. The Carthaginian fleet advances on Sicily. One morning, before the mist had cleared from the harbor, a large Carthaginian fleet set sail. The galleys, with their white sails full of wind, lined up like a migrating flock of birds. Admiral Malchus, a man known for his decisiveness, led the way. He was not a cold-blooded warrior, but a sailor who understood the sea, who knew how to listen to the wind and waves. Carthage did not come to Sicily to conquer, but to send a message. This sea belongs to everyone, not just one city-state. Sicily, the island of fire and smoke. Sicily was a place where nature was both gentle and fierce. Mount Etna puffed white smoke, a reminder that beneath the earth, hot fire was ready to erupt. Fields of wheat and olive groves stretched at the foot of the mountain, interspersed with Greek towns, with white stone columns and Carthaginian trading posts with red brick walls. The native people, the Elymians and Sicanians, watched the competition between Greece and Carthage with worried eyes. They understood that if these two powers clashed, Sicily would become a battlefield, and the fire of war would consume its inherent peace. The Call of Carthage. Upon landing on the western coast of Sicily, Malchus summoned the Elymian tribal chiefs. He told them, "Carthage has not come to seize land. We have come to protect the common road, the road of trade and freedom." The tribal chiefs, who were looked down upon by the Greeks, felt that Carthage was a trustworthy ally. They agreed to provide food and soldiers to support the Carthaginian fleet. From then on, Carthage had a solid foothold on the island. Tense days before the war. While Carthage strengthened its alliances, Syracuse did not stand still. They fortified their city, placed watchtowers along the coast, and trained their fleet. Both sides were like two sea monsters circling slowly, waiting for the right moment to strike. Scout ships from both sides frequently met at sea. Each time the atmosphere was as tense as a drawn bowstring. A wrong look, an unrestrained movement could ignite a major battle. The last songs of peace. Before the fire of war erupted, Carthage still tried to keep the sea shanties from being forgotten. Sailors sang by the fireside in the Sicilian harbors, telling stories of their trading voyages to Iberia and Egypt. The sounds of harps and flutes rose as a reminder that war was not the goal, but only a shadow on the path of commerce. The tactics of Malchus. Admiral Malchus did not want to shed blood needlessly. He outlined a clear strategy. Control the ports of western Sicily, where Carthage had a geographical advantage. Avoid direct confrontation with the Syracuse fleet unless necessary. Protect the merchant convoys as if they were the lifeblood of Carthage. He believed that Carthage's patience and flexibility would force Syracuse to yield, or at least delay a full-scale war. A prayer. Before the storm. Before the fleet set sail to patrol the waters around Syracuse, the priest of the Temple of Tanit performed a ceremony. The sacred flame flickered, reflecting on the determined faces of the sailors. Everyone understood that a new era was beginning, where Carthage would be not only a merchant, but also a warrior protecting freedom on the sea. Drums on the night sea. That night, the Carthaginian fleet silently advanced into the waters of southern Sicily. The sea was pitch black, sparkling only with moonlight, and the oil lamps hung on the ship's decks. The Carthaginian sailors rowed in steady rhythm, their oars cutting through the water with a sound like drums. Those drum beats echoed in the night, reminding each person that the entire city of Carthage was placing its trust in them. Admiral Malchus stood on the prow of the largest ship. He did not shout, but gave orders with hand signals. Each signal was a clearly understood command. Maintain formation. Keep the rhythm of the sea's heart. Carthage did not want to start a war, but if war came, they would face it as children of the sea. The first clash with Syracuse. At dawn the next day, just as the sun was rising, the Carthaginian fleet encountered a group of patrol ships from Syracuse. The sea seemed to hold its breath. The ships of both sides stopped, only a few hundred meters apart. Not a word was spoken, only the sound of the wind and waves. Then, an arrow was accidentally shot from a Syracuse ship. In that moment, history changed color. The Carthaginian ships charged forward like swordfish, their bronze prows ramming hard into the sides of the Greek ships. The sound of splintering wood, shouts, and oars striking the water echoed loudly. The battle was short but fierce. Syracuse lost 2 patrol ships, the rest retreated. Carthage had won its first victory in the waters of Sicily. But when the smoke cleared, Malchus stood silently, looking at the sea reddened by the dawn. He knew this was just the beginning. The native cities turned to Carthage. News of Carthage's victory spread throughout Sicily. The Elymian and Sicanian tribes saw Carthage as a reliable protector. They sent emissaries to Malchus's port, bringing food and skilled warriors. An Elymian chief said, "The Greeks build walls to rule, but you open doors to trade. We choose Carthage." From then on, Carthage had not only a fleet at sea, but also allies on land, helping them control the ports of western Sicily sustainably. The Council of Elders and the Flames of War. In Carthage, the Council of Elders received news of the first battle with a mix of pride and anxiety. An elderly merchant said, "We won a battle, but if the war spreads, we will pay the price. Every ship lost is not just wood and bronze, but the children of the sea." The priest in the Temple of Tanit burned more incense, praying for peace. But the incense smoke could not hide the truth. Sicily was burning, and Carthage had to decide whether to be an observer or the driver of its own destiny. Carthage, prowess in negotiation. Malchus, instead of heading straight into war, sent an envoy to Syracuse. His message was simple but powerful. The sea belongs to all. If you want war, Carthage will not retreat. But if you want to trade, we can prosper together. Syracuse, as proud as a Greek warrior, did not answer immediately. They continued to strengthen their fleet, but did not dare to underestimate Carthage, the one who had just proven it knew not only how to buy and sell, but also how to fight with intelligence. A long day at the port of Lilybaeum. Carthage chose Lilybaeum, western Sicily, as its main base. It was a natural harbor where the sea breeze always blew gently and the water was as blue as jade. Here, blacksmiths set up small workshops, forging weapons and repairing ships. Elymian and Numidian warriors trained alongside Carthaginian sailors, creating a mixed but well-coordinated force. Every afternoon, Malchus walked along the harbor, talking to each group of sailors. He always reminded them, "We came here not to destroy, but to protect our lifeline. Remember that when you set sail." The Sicilian Sea, days of smoke and wind. From Lilybaeum, Carthage organized patrols throughout the southern and western waters of Sicily. They not only patrolled, but also helped merchant ships pass safely, regardless of whether they were Carthaginian or neutral. This led many merchants to believe that Carthage was the guardian of the sea, not just an ambitious power. However, Syracuse saw this as a challenge. Minor clashes continued to occur, each time pushing the two sides closer to all-out war. The song on Barca Hill. Back home in Carthage, whenever the fleet set sail, people gathered on Barca Hill. They lit oil lamps, looking out at the distant sea, as if that light could follow them all the way to Sicily. An old song was sung, "We do not seek war, we seek fair winds and a blue sea. But if others light fires on the waves, we will be the wind that blows those flames out." The naval battle off Motia. The first major confrontation between Carthage and Syracuse broke out near the island of Motia, a port city long controlled by Carthage. Syracuse sent a powerful fleet to attack, determined to break Carthage's defensive line. Admiral Malchus commanded the Carthaginian fleet with his usual composure. He did not rush into battle, but deployed a crescent formation, light ships in the center with heavy warships on the wings. When Syracuse focused its attack on the center, the two Carthaginian wings quickly closed in like a trap, surrounding the enemy. The battle lasted until sunset. Wood splintered, oars broke, and shouts echoed. But Carthage was victorious, not just because of strength, but because of the cohesion of its sailors, mercenaries, and even its native Sicilian allies. Motia stood firm, becoming a symbol of Carthaginian will. Losses and cries in the night. Despite the victory, Carthage also suffered heavy losses. More than 10 ships were severely damaged, and many sailors did not return. That night, at Lilybaeum, the people lit hundreds of oil lamps on the beach, each one a soul sent off to sea. The elderly told the children stories of the fallen heroes, not to sow hatred, but to teach that freedom and commerce always have a price. Carthage did not celebrate with loud triumphs. They chose silence and prayer, a silence as beautiful and deep as the night sea. Syracuse responds. Syracuse, though defeated at Motia, did not easily retreat. They summoned more troops, built new fortresses, and sent a larger fleet towards western Sicily. This time, their target was not just Carthage, but the assertion of Greek power in the western Mediterranean. In the following months, Sicily became a giant chessboard, where Carthage and Syracuse constantly moved troops, captured and retreated. Every port, every small island became a strategic point for survival. Malchus and the philosophy of the sea. During the most intense days, Malchus often sat on the prow of his ship in the evening, quietly watching the stars. He told his young officers, "The sea belongs to no one. We cannot hold a sword to possess the sea. We can only learn to live in harmony with it. Every battle is a test, not to destroy, but to see who understands the sea better." That statement made many Carthaginians think. They realized that the war with Syracuse was not to dominate, but to keep the sea a bridge connecting civilizations. A long winter at Lilybaeum. The fighting temporarily subsided as winter arrived. The Carthaginian fleet anchored at Lilybaeum, while Syracuse withdrew its troops to their city. The Sicilian winter was cold and damp, but the port of Carthage remained lit. Blacksmiths repaired ships, merchants traded with local tribes, and sailors practiced rowing even in the rain and wind. On long nights by the fireside, they told stories of their home, Carthage, where the sea was gentle and the Temple of Tanit still burned brightly. These stories were like a fire warming their hearts amidst the war. Reflections on peace. Some Carthaginian merchants began to ask, "How long will we fight? What will become of the sea when it is stained red with blood?" The Council of Elders also debated finding a way to negotiate with Syracuse, but no one was ready to concede. Nevertheless, Carthage still held a quiet dream of peace, because they understood that only peace could make the sea a road of wealth and connection again. The new drums of the following year. The following spring, the war erupted again. This time, Carthage proactively intercepted the Syracuse fleet off the coast of Agrigentum. The naval battle was fierce, but Carthage once again proved that the close coordination between warships, Balearic slingers, and Numidian cavalry could defeat Greek power. The Battle of Agrigentum was not just a victory, but a confirmation that Carthage had matured into a true naval power, one that knew not only how to trade, but also how to protect with strength. There were nights in Carthage when the wind from the sea blew through the stone-paved streets, and people would still tell stories of the gaze of Hannibal Barca, a gaze like a fire that never went out. It was not just the eyes of a warrior, but the look of a man who carried in his heart an oath carved deeper than steel and bronze. The child of sea and blood, Hannibal Barca was born when Carthage was recovering from its defeat against the Roman Empire in the First Punic War. The city, though still vibrant with trade and the sea, had lost its former glory. Hannibal's father, Hamilcar Barca, a brilliant general, always looked towards the sea with a heavy heart. He understood that Carthage could not bow its head forever. From a young age, Hannibal was taught by his father. The sea is our lifeline, but Rome wants to turn it into shackles. One day, you must make them know that Carthage is still Carthage. Once, Hamilcar took the boy to the Temple of Baal Hammon, where the sacred flame burned brightly through the night. In that reddish-pink light, Hamilcar made him place his hand on the altar and swear, "I will never be a friend to Rome. I will live and fight until Carthage's honor is restored." That oath became the red thread that guided Hannibal's entire life. The father and the initiating wind. Hamilcar Barca was the first role model Hannibal looked up to. He was not just a general, but a strategist who understood both the sea and the land. Hamilcar had once led the Carthaginian army to Iberia, Spain, a land rich in minerals and precious wood, where he rebuilt Carthage's strength from the ashes of defeat. Hannibal, still a teenager, accompanied his father on these expeditions. He learned to listen to the wind on the mountains, read the flow of rivers, and look into the eyes of warriors to predict their will. Hamilcar often said, "A general needs more than a sword and a spear. He needs a heart that knows how to listen, to the land, to the wind, and even to the enemy's fear." Hannibal carved these words deep into his memory as a lesson for survival. Love for Carthage. Despite growing up in Iberia, Hannibal's heart was always with Carthage. Every time he looked at the Atlantic Ocean, he remembered the special blue of the Carthaginian sea, the bustling ports, and the call of Barca Hill. In Hannibal's mind, Carthage was not just a city, but a mother who had been shamed and needed a strong son to avenge her. The death of Hamilcar and the Barca flame. Hamilcar Barca died when Hannibal was just over 20, leaving behind a legacy of a strong army in Iberia and an unquenched hatred for Rome. Hasdrubal, Hannibal's brother-in-law, continued to lead, but the name Barca, meaning thunderbolt, seemed to truly live only in Hannibal's heart. On long nights, the young man sat by the campfire, remembering his father's words. Never forget the oath. Every time he heard the waves, he heard in them the call to avenge Carthage. The young warrior. When Hasdrubal was assassinated, the Carthaginian army in Iberia chose Hannibal as their general. He was only 25, but his steel-sharp gaze and composure made the warriors trust him completely. Hannibal understood that the fate of Carthage now rested on his shoulders. He did not rally his troops with grandiloquent words. Instead, he told his soldiers, "We do not fight to die. We fight so that Carthage may live in glory." From that moment, the journey to avenge Rome began. The everlasting oath. Before launching his campaign, Hannibal went to an ancient temple in Iberia. He offered sacrifices to Tanit and Baal Hammon and repeated his oath. "I, Hannibal Barca, will never rest as long as Rome exists as an oppressor of Carthage. Every breath I take is to restore honor to my homeland." This oath was not just a ritual, but the very breath of Hannibal's life. It made him willing to go to the ends of the earth, to cross any mountain and glacier, just to see Rome bow before Carthage. Departure from Iberia. The Iberian sky that morning was clear blue, but within the hearts of the Carthaginian soldiers, a storm was brewing. Hannibal Barca, with eyes burning like forged steel, stood on the command ship's deck, looking north, where the white mountains, like the swords of the gods, awaited. "We will do what no one has ever done," he told his officers. "We will push past the very limits of humanity." The Carthaginian army left Iberia with a formidable force, over 50,000 infantry, 9,000 cavalry, and 37 war elephants. Each of their steps carried not only weapons, but also the Carthaginian oath, the oath to restore the honor stolen after the First Punic War. A daring idea. Hannibal knew well that a direct confrontation with the Roman navy was suicide. Rome controlled the sea with hundreds of warships, and Carthage could hardly break through. He chose a path no one dared to consider, marching across the Alps, crossing treacherous territory to unexpectedly deploy his army into Italy from the north. Many Carthaginian generals objected, calling it a crazy plan. But Hannibal just smiled. If we want to do something extraordinary, we must choose the path no one dares to take. The journey through Gaul. To reach the Alps, Hannibal had to cross the lands of the Gauls, fierce and unpredictable tribes. He did not choose confrontation. Instead, Hannibal used diplomacy and generosity, giving gifts, sharing spoils, and allowing Gallic chieftains to join his war council. A Gallic chieftain once said, "He is not like a Carthaginian. He is like a Gallic warrior born in the south." Thanks to this cleverness, Hannibal turned potential enemies into allies and guides through the dense forests and icy rivers. Touching the white wall of ice. When the Carthaginian army reached the foot of the Alps, everyone fell silent. The snow-capped peaks soared into the sky, blindingly white, and seemed to have no path. Many soldiers looked up at the peaks, their eyes full of fear. They were children of a hot land and a blue sea. They had never known a cold so bitter it made their skin bleed. Hannibal did not let fear spread. He stepped onto a rock, his voice ringing out in the wind. On the other side of this mountain range is Italy, the heart of Rome. Every step we climb is a step closer to victory. Snowstorms and campfires. The journey across the Alps was difficult, not only because of the altitude, but also because of snowstorms and rock slides. At night, the temperature dropped to near freezing. Carthaginian sailors, accustomed to the Mediterranean climate, had to keep fires burning all night to stay warm. They gathered every dry branch and even animal dung to burn, as there was little firewood on the mountain. On some nights, the wind howled like a monster. Many soldiers couldn't sleep, huddling beside the war elephants. The shivering elephants breathed out white smoke in the cold mist. Death on the way. The Alps demanded a terrible price. Thousands of soldiers fell to cold, hunger, and exhaustion. Many slipped and fell into deep abysses, their screams echoing off the cliffs like the cries of ghosts. The elephants, though strong, also fell one by one. But Hannibal never stopped. He walked among his troops, helping the wounded soldiers and encouraging each one. "Every life lost is a reason for us to survive, to defeat Rome," he said. The moment on the summit. When the army reached the highest peak, Hannibal stopped, looking south. In the distance, the Italian plain appeared like a shimmering green carpet under the sun. He pointed and said, "Down there is Rome. From here, nothing can stop us." That statement was like a flame that lit up the hearts of the entire army. Although they had lost nearly half their forces, their faith had never been brighter. The descent. A path of death. If climbing up was difficult, descending was even more dangerous. The path was steep and slippery, the rocks like knives, and enemies lurked in the forest. Hannibal had to have his troops pour hot vinegar on the rocks, then shatter them to open a path for the elephants and carts. That image, Carthaginian warriors pouring vinegar on mountain rocks amidst the cold snow, has become a legend of Hannibal's creativity and resilience. Setting foot in Italy, finally, After 17 days of crossing the Alps, the army had about 26,000 men and a few surviving elephants left. They stood on the Italian plain, where the wind was warmer and the green land stretched far. Hannibal looked back at the white, snow-capped mountains behind him and whispered softly, "We have done what no one dared to do. Now Rome will have to tremble." Entering the Italian plain, when Hannibal's army finally set foot on the flatlands of Italy, it was like stepping out of a harsh nightmare. After 17 days of torment amidst blizzards, rock slides, and skin-biting cold, the Italian plain stretched before them like a reward. The wind from the south carried the scent of moist earth, of wheat, and green pastures, a scent many soldiers had forgotten after their hellish journey. Hannibal stood on a high mound, looking towards the distant horizon where the path led to Rome. He told his officers, "We have climbed the mountain of the gods. Ahead, every challenge will be as small as pebbles." Though they had lost more than half their force, the spirit of the Carthaginian army burned brighter than ever. They were no longer afraid because if they could cross the Alps, nothing could make them flinch. Meeting potential allies. In the Po Valley, Hannibal quickly established contact with the Gauls, tribes that had suffered under Roman rule and contempt. He promised them freedom, gold, and honor if they sided with Carthage. The Gauls were greatly impressed by the sight of the war elephants, something they had never seen before. In their eyes, Hannibal was not just a general, but a war god from the south. Thousands of Gallic warriors joined the Carthaginian army, bringing with them weapons, food, and knowledge of the Italian terrain. Hannibal had turned the tribe's hatred for Rome into strength for Carthage. The Battle of the Trebia, the first shock. The first major clash between Hannibal and Rome on Italian soil took place at the Trebia River, 218 BC. The Roman army, under Tiberius Sempronius Longus, believed they could easily crush an army exhausted after crossing the Alps. They had no idea that Hannibal had prepared a deadly trap. He had his troops provoke the Roman army to cross the river on a cold morning. As the Romans reached the bank, Hannibal unleashed his war elephants and Gallic cavalry from both flanks, while an ambush force burst out from the forest behind them. The Romans were trapped in the middle, thrown into chaos. When the Battle of the Trebia ended, more than 20,000 Roman soldiers lay dead on the riverbank. This news came as a shock to Rome. Once again, Hannibal's oath echoed, "I will never stop." A Carthaginian winter on Italian soil. After the Trebia, Hannibal let his army rest for the winter in the Po Valley. The Gauls provided food, while Carthaginian blacksmiths forged new weapons from shipwrecks and spoils of war. That winter, Hannibal inspired his soldiers by telling them stories of Carthage, of the Blue Sea, and of the blood oath of his childhood. He always walked among the ranks, eating the same scarce food as his soldiers. It was this equality that made him deeply loved and respected. The Battle of Lake Trasimene, the Trap of the Mist. The following spring, Hannibal continued his advance into central Italy. At Lake Trasimene, he created one of the greatest ambushes in history. Knowing that the Roman army would pass through a narrow road between the lake and the hills, Hannibal hid his entire main force on the hillsides, leaving only a small force to block the road ahead. As the Romans entered the path, the sound of horns blared, and the Carthaginian army swarmed down from three sides like thunder. The thick morning mist prevented the Romans from seeing the enemy until it was too late. The battle lasted only a few hours, and about 15,000 Roman soldiers were killed. Rome began to be truly afraid, not just because of the defeat, but because they realized that Hannibal did not fight with strength, but with the mind of a genius. Hannibal's emotions. After each victory, Hannibal was not triumphant. He would often sit by the fire at night looking south, where Carthage lay by the Mediterranean Sea. He knew that each victory was just a small step in the long journey to force Rome to submit. In his heart, the oath of long ago still burned. I will make Rome kneel, or I will die on this path. The beginning of the Cannae legend. After Trebia and Trasimene, Hannibal continued to advance deep into Italy, preparing for the battle that would carve his name into history, the Battle of Cannae. He studied every habit of the Roman army, every weakness in their formation. In Hannibal's mind, the war was not just a clash of forces, but a chess game where every move was calculated. Cannae. A dance of tactics. In the summer of 216 BC, Hannibal decided to fight a major battle with Rome to force his opponent to rethink the war. The Battle of Cannae took place in southern Italy, where the plains were open and the scorching sun beat down like fire. The Roman army brought over 80,000 soldiers to the battlefield, twice the size of the Carthaginian army. But Hannibal was unfazed. He arranged his troops in a crescent formation, with the weaker troops in the center and the stronger ones on the flanks. As the Romans charged forward and pushed back the Carthaginian center, Hannibal's flanks closed in, encircling the entire enemy force. It was no longer a battle, but a deadly dance of tactics. Tens of thousands of Roman soldiers were trapped, unable to move or retreat. When the sun set, more than 50,000 Roman soldiers lay dead on the fields of Cannae. Rome trembles. The news of Cannae struck Rome like a thunderbolt. Fear of Hannibal spread throughout the city. The people of Rome whispered, "Hannibal ad portas." Hannibal is at the gates. Rome had never faced such an enemy, a man who dared to cross the Alps, defeat every army, and now threatened the heart of the empire. But it was this very defeat that made Rome more resilient. They began to adopt a strategy of avoiding direct confrontation, not giving Hannibal the opportunity to fight decisive battles. The solitary shadow of Hannibal. Despite his victory, Hannibal also felt a sense of loneliness. He looked at the fields full of dead Roman soldiers and sighed, "What is the meaning of this victory if Rome does not kneel?" He waited for reinforcements from Carthage, but the Council of Elders hesitated. They feared a prolonged war would affect trade. Hannibal was like a lone lion in the Italian plains, powerful, but without a pride to back him up. The long years in Italy. After Cannae, Hannibal captured many city-states in southern Italy. The people there welcomed him as a savior, as they were tired of Roman rule. But Hannibal knew that without a decisive blow to the city of Rome, the war would never end. He considered attacking Rome many times, but his forces were insufficient. He chose guerrilla warfare, attacking logistics, destroying food stores, and exhausting Rome little by little. The legacy of a mountain. Crossing the Alps was not just a military feat, but a symbol of human will. Hannibal and his army did what no one dared to imagine. They conquered harsh nature to open a path to the enemy's heart. The Romans, though his opponents, had to acknowledge his greatness. The historian Polybius later wrote, "There has never been anyone like Hannibal. He turned mountains into bridges, snowstorms into allies, and fear into a weapon." Hannibal's dream. On quiet nights, Hannibal often remembered the moment on the summit of the Alps when he first saw the Italian plain. For him, it was not just a strategy, but a dream of a resurrected Carthage. He told his officers, "I made a promise to my father and to Carthage. As long as Rome remains arrogant, I will not stop walking." The wrath of Rome. After Cannae, Rome was in a state of shock. Never before in its history had the great city faced an enemy at its very gates, seemingly unstoppable. Hannibal Barca, the son of Carthage, had turned the Italian battlefield into a stage to affirm his talent and iron will. However, Rome did not fall. Rome's greatest strength lay not only in its army, but in its unyielding republican spirit. As the city reeled, the Roman Senate met through the night, each discussion echoing like a bell heralding a new era of resistance. The emergence of Scipio Africanus. In those dark days, a name began to rise: Publius Cornelius Scipio. As a young man, he had faced the Carthaginian army and survived Cannae, an experience that changed his entire life. Scipio not only saw Hannibal's strength, but also learned from his enemy. Scipio was not a rash man. He was like Hannibal in one respect. He knew how to wait for the right moment, how to choose his battles. Under Scipio's leadership, Rome stopped confronting Hannibal directly in Italy and opened a more intelligent counter-strategy, attacking the very roots of Carthaginian power in Spain and North Africa. The intellectual game begins. Hannibal and Scipio had not yet met, but their fates began to intertwine. Hannibal was a master of ambush and battlefield tactics. Scipio, from his hard-earned lessons, learned to turn war into a grand chess game, where patience and strategic vision were more important than immediate victories. Scipio told his colleagues, "To cut down a tree, strike at its roots. Hannibal's roots are not in Italy, but in Carthage." Rome changes its strategy. Instead of trying to defeat Hannibal in Italy, where he held the advantage, Rome began to cut off Hannibal's sources of aid. Roman generals attacked Carthaginian strongholds in Iberia. Every city lost was a supply line to Hannibal cut off. Meanwhile, Hannibal, despite winning many victories, gradually became isolated. He was like an arrow lodged deep in Rome's heart, but receiving no further power from the Carthaginian bow. Scipio, the student of defeat. Scipio had witnessed the horror at Cannae. He understood that Rome could not defeat Hannibal with brute force alone. Instead, he learned to leverage discipline, unity, and new tactics. Under Scipio, the Roman army gradually became more flexible, capable of adapting to any terrain and opponent. The rise of Rome in Spain. In 209 BC, Scipio Africanus captured Carthago Nova, the strategic city and treasury center of Carthage in Iberia. This was a severe blow to Hannibal's rear. Upon hearing the news, Hannibal remained silent for a long time. He knew the battle was not just being fought in Italy, but was a chess game across the entire Mediterranean. The pressure mounts on Hannibal. In the years after Cannae, Hannibal remained in Italy, but could not advance on Rome. The city's defenses were too strong, and the Roman army gradually learned to avoid his tactical traps. Hannibal was like a cornered tiger, roaring but unable to extend his claws to his rival's heart. At night, he often stood watching the stars, remembering the blood oath of his youth. Could he fulfill his promise to Carthage when Rome had begun to change itself? Rumors of a decisive battle. As Scipio continued to win in Spain, the Roman Senate decided it was time to bring the war to Carthage itself. This plan would force Hannibal to return to his homeland, abandoning Italy, the land where he had fought for so many years. An indescribable feeling arose in Hannibal's heart. He had not lost, but he had to leave the battlefield where his name resonated most. It was a farewell between a genius and the land that had made his legend. The silence. Before the storm, Carthage understood that the decisive battle was approaching. Blacksmiths worked day and night, new war elephants were trained, and the people lit lamps in the Temple of Tanit, praying for a miracle. In Rome, Scipio prepared for the final battle with a terrifying calm. He knew he would face the greatest man Rome had ever encountered. In Scipio's heart, Hannibal was not just an enemy, but an invisible teacher of the art of war. Scipio and the new battlefield in North Africa. Scipio and the new battlefield in North Africa. When Scipio Africanus became commander-in-chief, he understood that to end the war, Rome had to strike at the heart of Carthage. After consolidating control in Spain, he led his army across the sea into North Africa, a place Carthage had felt secure for generations. Before leaving Spain, Scipio stood before his soldiers and said, "We are not just going to North Africa to fight Carthage. We are going to end the war so that Rome may forever be Rome." That statement became a counter-oath to Hannibal's. While Hannibal fought to restore Carthage's honor, Scipio fought to protect and elevate the glory of Rome. Carthage on the defensive. When Scipio landed in North Africa, Carthage was surprised and disoriented. They had believed that Hannibal, with his victories in Italy, was an impenetrable shield. But now Rome had crossed the sea, directly threatening the Carthaginian homeland. The Council of Elders was forced to recall Hannibal from Italy. After 16 years of fighting on Italian soil, Hannibal had to leave the battlefield that had made his name. As he left Italy, he looked back at the Apennine Mountains and the Italian plains where he had defeated so many Roman armies. Hannibal whispered, "I have not lost to you, but now I must return to Mother Carthage." The return of Hannibal. Hannibal returned to Carthage as a hero. The people crowded the streets, throwing flowers and chanting his name. But in Hannibal's heart, he knew the greatest battle lay ahead. There were no more familiar Italian forests, no more freedom to choose guerrilla tactics. The upcoming battle would be a face-to-face confrontation, deciding the fate of all of Carthage. The meeting of two geniuses. Before the battle took place, Scipio and Hannibal agreed to meet for negotiations. This meeting, recorded in the annals of history, is one of the greatest moments in military history. The two men, one representing Carthage, the other Rome, sat under the shade of an olive tree, the wind blowing from the sea. Hannibal, with a quiet gaze, said, "I have grown old on the battlefield. I have learned that war has no winners, only those who lose less. Do you dare to let peace win this battle?" Scipio replied, "I respect you, Hannibal, but Rome cannot back down. If not you, who will fight for Carthage? If not I, who will stand up for Rome?" The meeting ended without peace. The two geniuses understood they were born to confront each other. The Battle of Zama, the end of an oath. In 202 BC, the Battle of Zama took place on the plains of North Africa. This was the battle where both civilizations gambled everything. Carthage had about 40,000 troops and their remaining war elephants. Rome, under Scipio, had a disciplined army and a fiery spirit. Hannibal sent his war elephants out first, hoping to break the Roman lines. But Scipio had prepared open lanes, allowing the elephants to run through without causing major damage. Then, the Roman cavalry circled around both flanks, creating an encirclement, the very tactic Hannibal had used at Cannae. When the sun set, Carthage was defeated. More than 20,000 Carthaginian soldiers lay dead on the battlefield. Hannibal retreated, his eyes no longer blazing, but still resolute. Hannibal and the nameless pain. After Zama, Hannibal returned to Carthage, walking through the streets that had once hailed him as a god. Now, the city was silent, as if in mourning. The Council of Elders had to sign a humiliating peace treaty with Rome, losing many colonies and having to pay enormous war reparations. But Hannibal did not give up. He continued to reform Carthaginian politics, seeking to restore the city. He believed that one day Carthage would rise again. Scipio and his respect for Hannibal. Scipio, after his victory, did not belittle his opponent. He told his Roman generals, "We did not just defeat an army, we have just faced a legend. Let us respect Hannibal as we respect history." The two men, the victor and the vanquished, both left an immortal mark. Their confrontation became a symbol of wisdom, courage, and will. The city after the storm. The city after the storm. After the defeat at Zama, Carthage was like a fallen warrior, still with his eyes open to the world. The streets that once cheered for Hannibal's campaigns were now shrouded in silence. The city walls themselves seemed to bow before the shadow of Rome. The treaty with Rome forced Carthage to pay a huge indemnity, lose most of its fleet and colonies, but it still possessed a proud soul. In the first nights after the war, the people of Carthage gathered on Barca Hill, lighting oil lamps and praying under the statue of Tanit. The light was faint but resilient, like the belief that the city would rise from the ashes. Hannibal, from warrior to reformer. Hannibal Barca did not disappear after his defeat. Instead, he became the Suffet, chief magistrate of Carthage, the city's highest political position. He understood that Carthage could not confront Rome militarily at that moment, but it could rebuild from within. Hannibal carried out bold reforms. He curtailed the power of the corrupt aristocracy. He established a fair tax system, which helped pay the reparations to Rome faster. He developed commerce, expanding trade with Egypt, Asia Minor, and new markets. He once said, "We may be defeated in war, but commerce is Carthage's battlefield. There, we will not lose." Dawn from commerce. Under Hannibal's leadership, Carthage revived miraculously. Merchant ships set sail again, carrying olive oil, silver, spices, and the famous Carthaginian purple cloth. The port returned to its bustling state, the calls of merchants echoing throughout the Mediterranean. The people of Carthage, though pained by their losses, retained the spirit of seafarers. They did not stay down for long. After just a few years, Carthage had nearly paid off its war indemnity to Rome, an achievement that astonished even its enemies. Rome and the fear of Carthage's return. Rome could not ignore this resurgence. Many Roman senators began to worry. If Carthage revives, will there be a second Hannibal? In the Roman Senate, a famous phrase was repeated over and over by Cato the Elder. Carthago delenda est. Carthage must be destroyed. This was not just a threat, but a bell tolling for a new conflict. A war between a city that only wanted to trade and an empire that refused to share power on the sea. Political shadows. Though loved by the people, Hannibal was envied by the Carthaginian aristocracy because his reforms diminished their privileges. Rome, seeing an opportunity, pressured Carthage to hand over Hannibal. To prevent Carthage from falling into a dangerous position, Hannibal voluntarily left his homeland, living in exile in the courts of the East, such as Asia Minor and Syria. But even when he was not in Carthage, his name remained a symbol of unyielding will. Carthage does not sleep without Hannibal. Carthage continued on its path of recovery. Trade grew remarkably, and the city became the richest financial center in the Mediterranean within a few decades. Markets were expanded, temples were restored, and schools of navigation sprang up like mushrooms. The Carthaginians began to rebuild their merchant fleet, but avoided creating a war fleet so as not to provoke Rome. They understood that wisdom was their strongest weapon at this time. The years of dawn. For a time, Carthage truly lived in a brilliant dawn of commerce. Carthaginian ships docked everywhere, from Alexandria to Rhodes, from Cyprus to the coast of Gaul. Carthaginian purple cloth was sought after by European nobility, while Iberian silver was minted into coins that circulated throughout the region. But hidden beneath this prosperity, the fear that Rome would never let go smoldered. The Carthaginians never forgot Zama, just as Rome never forgot Cannae. The miraculous revival of Carthage. Despite losing most of its fleet and territory, Carthage did not sink into despair. Through trade and resourcefulness alone, they turned their city into the largest financial center in the Mediterranean. Carthaginian merchants, with their sharp eyes and quick minds, established a trade network stretching from Egypt, Greece, and Asia Minor to Iberia and Gaul. The port of Carthage, once gloomy after the war, now shone brightly under the sun. Merchant ships with large white and red sails continuously entered and exited, carrying wine, olive oil, spices, and silver. Foreigners visiting Carthage had to admit, this city is like a chipped gem, but it still shines. Hannibal's legacy in the economy. Although no longer in command of an army, Hannibal left a profound influence on how Carthage managed its trade. He once advised the Council of Elders, "If you cannot conquer with sword and spear, then conquer with goods and reliability." Carthage applied a professional trading system, transparent pricing, ensuring security for international partners, expanded warehouses and ports, facilitating quick loading and unloading. Longer sea voyages, opening new routes to the coast of sub-Saharan Africa. This revival was so swift that in just 2 decades Carthage had paid off its enormous indemnity to Rome, a feat that left many Roman senators bewildered. Rome, the fear of Carthage's return. In the Roman Senate, hardline voices grew louder. Marcus Porcius Cato, Cato the Elder, whenever he spoke, ended with the sentence, "Carthago delenda est," Carthage must be destroyed. Cato was not just a politician, but a man obsessed with Carthage's resurgence. He believed that if Rome did not act, a new Hannibal would emerge. His words became a cold prophecy of Carthage's fate. Hannibal in exile. Unwilling to submit, Hannibal left Carthage to avoid giving Rome a pretext. He traveled to Tyre, Syria, and Asia Minor, where he became a military advisor to Greek and Seleucid kings. But Hannibal never forgot Carthage. It is said that on nights in Antioch, he would still look west, where the Mediterranean Sea was a distant haze, and say, "Carthage is my soul. Though I am not there, my heart still beats for it." Carthage in the shadow of politics. Without Hannibal, Carthage fell into internal disputes. The merchant aristocracy seized power, focusing on profits and sometimes neglecting defense. Rome exploited this to force Carthage to comply with even stricter terms, even though the old treaty was no longer in effect. Despite this, Carthage refused to stop rising. The people continued to grow olives, produce purple cloth, and mine Iberian silver. Carthaginian merchants even opened trade routes with distant African kingdoms, bringing back gold, ivory, and precious stones. The Golden Dawn. Around 180–160 BC, Carthage entered a period of rare post-war prosperity. New structures were built, large granaries and treasuries for storing food. The temples of Tanit and Baal Hammon were restored, their domes gleaming with bronze. Naval schools where young sailors were trained in astronomy and navigation. The city of Carthage, seen from the sea, looked like a brilliant orange-red gem in the sunset. Travelers from Greece and Egypt all recorded in their books that Carthage had not only revived, but had excelled through wisdom and trade. The seeds of tragedy. But it was this very prosperity that made Rome all the more envious and fearful. They could not accept a potential rival rising again after just a few decades. Many factions in the Roman Senate began preparing a new campaign against Carthage. In Carthage, some people still harbored the illusion that Rome would maintain peace, but the wise merchants understood. We are living in the dawn, but after the dawn, there may be a long darkness. Rome watches in silence. Carthage's economic revival was like a bright flame in the night, but that light made Rome uneasy. In the Roman Senate, senators constantly monitored every development in the city across the sea. Cato the Elder, whenever he returned from a mission to the east, would bring a fresh fig from Carthage, place it on the table, and say, "Do you see? In just 3 days, this fig from Carthage has reached Rome. Carthage is closer and more dangerous than you think." That statement was not just an image, but a cold warning that Rome must prepare for the day of Carthage's destruction. Hannibal, a legend, far from home. While Carthage recovered, Hannibal remained in exile, becoming a silent ghost in history. He assisted King Antiochus III in his war against Rome, but was defeated. Afterward, Hannibal had to flee to Bithynia. A story tells that when he heard Rome had sent envoys to capture him, Hannibal smiled. "Rome is very patient, but I will not let myself fall into their hands. My road ends here." Hannibal drank poison, departing as a warrior who chose a free death over being a prisoner. Carthage received this news in silence, as if losing the heart that had once made the entire Mediterranean tremble. Carthage between two choices. After Hannibal's death, Carthage stood at a crossroads. One was to continue trading and hope Rome would let them be. The other was to prepare for a new, inevitable war. Many merchants believed in peace, but the old soldiers, who had once followed Hannibal, warned that Rome would never forgive. They could feel the dark clouds gathering from the north. The escalation of tensions. When Numidia, an ally of Rome, began harassing Carthage's borders, Carthage counterattacked without Rome's permission, an act that Rome considered a violation of the treaty. Hardline factions in the Roman Senate quickly seized the opportunity to call it a pretext for war. Cato the Elder and his fellow senators agreed. Carthage is strong enough to be a threat. It is time to end it once and for all. Omens in the city. The Carthaginians sensed unease. Ships from Italy brought news of Roman troops gathering. In the markets, merchants whispered that Rome wanted not just control, but to wipe Carthage off the map. At night, the Temple of Tanit glowed with prayers. An old priest quietly told the people, "We have lived through a brilliant dawn, but when the sun rises high, the darkness will return." The final pride. Despite knowing the danger, the Carthaginians refused to bow down. They sent envoys to Rome hoping for reconciliation, but the Senate only offered humiliating terms: complete disarmament, surrender of all weapons, and relocation of the city deep inland. A Carthaginian merchant said, "We would rather die under our own roofs than live without the sea and our harbor." The darkness descends. In the final years before the Third Punic War, Carthage was like a lion cornered. They knew Rome would strike, but no one was willing to give up the sea, the soul of the city. Secret shipyards began operating again, forging spears and restoring some warships. It was not just preparation for war, but a statement that Carthage would not be easily erased. The Roman shadow. When the Roman fleet appeared on the horizon, Carthage knew its last peaceful days were over. The wind blowing through the stone columns of the Temple of Tanit sounded like a warning. The Roman Senate, after years of hesitation, had decided to realize its long-held dream. Carthago delenda est. Carthage must be destroyed. Over 80,000 Roman soldiers landed in North Africa, led by Scipio Aemilianus, the adopted grandson of Scipio Africanus, the man who had defeated Hannibal at Zama. Carthage was stunned, but did not bow. They had lost everything before, but this time they would fight to their last breath. The final warning. Before the Roman army closed in, Roman envoys came to Carthage with absurd conditions. Surrender all weapons, reserves, and warships. Leave the city and relocate deep inland. This was tantamount to wiping Carthage off the map. The Carthaginian council was silent. An old merchant stood up, his hands trembling but his eyes blazing. If this is our fate, then let the sea and Barca hill witness us die as Carthaginians, not live as exiles. Carthage rises on its own. With no other choice, Carthage mobilized everyone, men, women, and children, to participate in arms production. Temples turned into forges, where the sound of hammers echoed through the night. Women cut their hair to make bowstrings. Shields were made from the wood of merchant ships, and spears were forged from any metal they could find. No one thought of surrendering. The spirit of Hannibal seemed to be silently present, reminding the Carthaginians that it was better to die in freedom than to live in slavery. The final walls Carthage was surrounded by strong city walls over 20 meters high, so thick that chariots could run on top. Rome thought they would break through easily, but the Carthaginians fought like cornered tigers. Every stone, every arrow carried the hatred that had accumulated since Hannibal's generation. Scipio Aemilianus, though an enemy, had to admit, never has a city fought so desperately and proudly. The days of siege. The siege lasted for months. Food ran out, and the Carthaginians had to eat roots and animal hides. But no one would open the gates. Every night, the flame from the Temple of Tanit still burned, like a lighthouse encouraging their spirits. The Roman soldiers, seeing this resilience, could not help but shudder. Carthage was not just a city, but a will to live, a pride that transcended fear. The rise of ordinary people. As the war intensified, ordinary people became heroes. They fought on the city walls with whatever they could hold. There were 15-year-old boys throwing stones from rooftops. There were mothers guarding weapons, encouraging their sons to fight. In the memory of Rome, those days in Carthage became a legend that would never fade. The final belief. One evening at sunset, as the sun dyed Barca hill red, the Carthaginians gathered in the central square. They sang ancient songs about the sea and their ancestors. An old man said, "We have lived, we have traded, we have loved the sea. If we are to go tomorrow, let Rome remember that Carthage never dies in fear." The fierce siege. The fierce siege. Rome did not attack Carthage with a quick battle. They besieged the city, tightening the noose. The Roman fleet blocked all sea exits, while the army surrounded it on all four sides. Not a grain of wheat, not a drop of water could enter the city. The Carthaginians were initially resilient. They believed their thick, high walls could withstand any assault. But time was a cruel enemy. Food supplies gradually dwindled, meals became scarce, and eventually there was nothing left but roots, bark, and plain water. The battles in the night. Every time Rome tried to breach the city walls, the Carthaginians fought back fiercely. At night, flaming arrows soared like shooting stars. The urgent beat of drums from the Temple of Tanit echoed throughout the city like the heartbeat of Carthage itself. Scipio Aemilianus observed from a distance, forced to admit, "I have never seen a people fight like this. They are not fighting to win, but to prove that Carthage deserves to exist." The blood-stained walls. In the 3rd month of the siege, the first wall of Carthage was breached. Rome advanced into the outskirts, but the Carthaginians built inner barricades, turning every street into a fortress. The battle from then on became a fight in every house, on every rooftop. Rome paid a heavy price. Every meter of land gained was exchanged for blood, but Rome had an endless supply line, while Carthage did not. The Shield of the Mothers. There is a story that when Roman troops advanced deep into a neighborhood, Carthaginian women took off their shawls to wrap them into oil-soaked bundles, throwing them down from the rooftops to burn the siege engines. Mothers stood on the city walls, their hands trembling, but their eyes shining like torches, shouting, "We are children of the sea never surrenders." Fire on Barca Hill. Barca Hill, the heart of Carthage, became the final defensive stronghold. When Roman troops surrounded the hill on 3 sides, the Carthaginians decided to burn all their granaries and goods so they would not fall into enemy hands. The entire hill blazed, with smoke rising like a black column straight into the sky. Scipio Aemilianus watched the flames from afar, a feeling of sorrow mixed with admiration rising in him. He exclaimed to a Roman general, "We are witnessing a city die like a falling star, blazing brightly before it disappears." The 3-day massacre. When Rome finally captured Barca Hill, the battle turned into a massacre. It took the Roman army 3 days to slaughter and burn everything. The streets of Carthage were flooded with blood, and smoke from the burning houses covered the sky. The last Carthaginians fought in the narrow alleys, with their bare hands or daggers, but no one surrendered. Many families committed suicide in the Temple of Tanit to preserve their honor. Carthage wiped from the map. After 3 days of slaughter, Scipio ordered the entire city to be leveled. Temples, markets, houses, all were burned to ashes. Legend says that Rome sowed salt on the land of Carthage so that nothing would grow again, as an eternal curse. As he watched the city burn brightly in the night, Scipio turned his face away and whispered, "Today, Carthage burns. But one day, Rome too will suffer the same fate. No empire lasts forever." The echo of the sea, the Mediterranean Sea, which had once witnessed the glory of Carthage, now only reflected the red flames. The once bustling merchant ships were now sunken, burned-out hulks. But in the sound of the night waves, one could almost hear the whisper of the Carthaginian souls. "We have lived, we have loved the sea, and we have died with pride." Ashes and darkness. Ashes and darkness. After 3 days of hell, Carthage was no longer a city of the sea and commerce. Black columns of smoke rose high, obscuring the sun, making the Mediterranean sky a somber gray, as if in mourning for a once glorious civilization. The Romans walked through the half-burned streets, where the ruined walls still smoldered. Scipio Aemilianus, though the victor, could not hide his sorrow as he witnessed a city as wealthy as Carthage being wiped out. He turned to a young general and said, "O Jupiter, will Rome one day suffer this same fate? No empire is eternal." The survivors. The few surviving Carthaginians were taken as slaves, divided up, and sent to various provinces of Rome. There were mothers who had to leave the city with empty hands, leaving behind their homes and the blue sea. They lost not only their homeland, but the very soul that had nurtured them. Legend tells that a group of Carthaginian women, before being captured, jumped into the sea together from the old harbor, choosing a free death over becoming slaves. That story became one of the final symbols of Carthaginian pride. Barca Hill. Without fire. Barca Hill, the heart of Carthage, was now just a pile of rubble. The temples of Tanit and Baal Hammon, where prayers once echoed, were now smashed. The sacred statues were thrown into the sea as if Rome wanted to erase even the memory of this city. However, it is said that on bright moonlit nights, the sound of the drums from the Temple of Tanit still echoes somewhere, as a reminder that Carthage may have been destroyed, but it will never disappear from the human mind. The legacy of Carthage. Although wiped from the map by Rome, Carthage left a profound legacy. The art of navigation and commerce, with a trade network that stretched across the Mediterranean. A resilient spirit, carved into history through battles like Cannae and the final resistance on Barca Hill. The stories of Hannibal, the general who crossed the Alps and made all of Rome tremble. Later merchants, even without Carthage, still mentioned its name with respect. Carthage didn't just trade goods, they traded dreams. Rome and the silent curse. After destroying Carthage, Rome turned the area into one of its provinces, Africa Proconsularis. But in the hearts of many Romans, the resilience of Carthage remained a haunting memory. There were generals who had witnessed the siege, and whenever they remembered Barca Hill, they saw the fire in the eyes of the last Carthaginians. Scipio Aemilianus, upon returning to Rome, was hailed as a hero. But at a banquet, he said to his friends, "I have won, but I am not happy. I see in those ashes the future image of every empire." The sea's farewell. The Mediterranean Sea, once the stage for Carthage, was now silent. The harbors were destroyed, the Carthaginian merchant ships burned. But the sound of the waves never forgot. Every time they lapped the shore, it was as if they whispered, "There was a city that once lived with me, loved me, and fell for freedom." A heartbeat still in the ashes. A heartbeat still in the ashes. When the fires of Rome died out on the streets of Carthage, people thought the city was dead. But a legacy never dies. The ashes of Carthage, carried by the wind and sea, brought with them stories of pride, wisdom, and the desire for freedom. The Carthaginian slaves were taken to distant lands, but they carried with them memories of bustling ports, white sails full of wind, and the brilliant sunsets over Barca Hill. In their lullabies, Carthage still existed, an image that could not be erased. Carthage in Roman memory Rome, though it had destroyed Carthage, could not escape being haunted by its old enemy. In Roman schools, the name Hannibal became a lesson for every soldier in courage and cunning. Roman generals, as they conquered the East and West, still remembered that there was once a Hannibal who made the entire empire tremble. Roman historians like Livy and Polybius recorded the war with Carthage with a strange respect. They not only told of victory, but also emphasized the greatness of the enemy, something few civilizations received from Rome. Hannibal. A timeless symbol. Though he died in exile, Hannibal Barca lived on in the minds of both friends and foes. He was not just a Carthaginian general, but a military legend for all time. Hannibal's tactics, from the ambush at Lake Trasimene to the encirclement at Cannae, became lessons for military academies for thousands of years. Napoleon once said, "Hannibal is my teacher. No one understands the art of war better than he." The legacy of commerce and navigation. Besides war, Carthage left a brilliant legacy of commerce and navigation. The Carthaginians were considered masters of the sea. They established a trade network that stretched from Spain to the coast of Britain. Their shipbuilding techniques, with a two-ringed harbor and an advanced pier system, were studied and copied by other civilizations. They developed fair trade practices and transparent contracts, laying the foundation for later maritime law. Though Carthage was burned to ashes, their knowledge and techniques spread across the Mediterranean, continuing to influence the Roman world and later empires. The sea and memory. The Mediterranean Sea did not forget Carthage. Fishermen from Sicily, Sardinia, and the North African coast still told stories of the city that disappeared under ash as a mysterious tale. When the sails were full and the sun set, people said you could hear the echo of Carthage in the sound of the waves lapping the shore. Rome builds on Carthaginian ashes. Despite destroying Carthage, Rome eventually had to rebuild the area because its strategic location was too important. On the ruins of Carthage, they erected Colonia Julia Carthago, turning it into one of the most prosperous Roman cities in Africa. But within the new walls, the old soul of Carthage still lingered. People still found stones carved with the names of Tanit and Baal Hammon, like a message from a civilization that refused to be forgotten. Carthage in human memory. Carthage is not just a city, but a symbol of defiance. From the story of Dido and the new city to the oath of Hannibal, Carthage became the image of a small but daring civilization that confronted a giant empire. In literature and poetry, Carthage lives on. Virgil's Aeneid tells of the tragic love between Aeneas and Dido, making Carthage the origin of Rome's destiny. Medieval poets invoked Carthage as a warning about the transience of power. The legend of Dido. In the stories retold over centuries, Queen Dido, the founder of Carthage, remains a symbol of pride and the desire for freedom. The tragic love story between Dido and Aeneas, immortalized by Virgil in the Aeneid, is not just a romantic legend, but a metaphorical prophecy of the Carthage-Rome rivalry. It is said that Dido's spirit still wanders on Barca Hill, where she once swore that Carthage would stand as firm as the stone columns in its harbor. This legend existed not only in Roman literature, but also spread into the Middle Ages, when Dido became a timeless symbol of female leadership. Hannibal in human memory. The name Hannibal Barca transcends his era. Napoleon, Wellington, and even 20th century strategists consider him one of the greatest military geniuses. The double envelopment tactic he used at Cannae became a classic lesson in many military academies. His crossing of the Alps became a testament to extraordinary will and the ability to turn the tide. The Romans once considered Hannibal their number one enemy, but later they respected and learned from him. It was Roman generals who later applied Hannibal's tactics in other wars. Influence in commerce and law. Carthage was one of the cradles of an organized trading system. Carthaginian merchants developed maritime contracts and trade laws, which laid the foundation for many later Roman commercial regulations. The Punic script, a variant of the Phoenician alphabet, which spread throughout North Africa and the Western Mediterranean. Ancient records show that Carthage had extremely detailed books on trade, taxes, and merchant ships, a form of management that many Greek city-states had to learn from. Religion and the symbol of Tanit. The Temple of Tanit, the patron goddess of Carthage, was destroyed, but her symbol of a triangle and a circle is still found on many artifacts throughout the Mediterranean. Tanit was a symbol of fertility, the sea, and victory. Carvings of Tanit still exist on the islands of Sardinia, Sicily, and Malta, proving that Carthaginian culture had spread much further than its territory. The voice from the sea. For generations, Mediterranean sailors continued to tell the story of Carthage as a cursed but not forgotten city. They believed that on full moon nights, when the waves crashed on the North African shore, one could hear the drums from the Temple of Tanit and the wind blowing through the ruined stone columns. Rome and its late recognition. After destroying Carthage, the Romans built Colonia Julia Carthago on its very ashes. It soon became a prosperous center of the Roman Empire in North Africa. The streets were paved in Roman style. Theaters, temples, and harbors were rebuilt. But beneath the new layers of brick, the soul of Carthage was still present. The Roman inhabitants of this land continued to tell the old stories, regarding Hannibal and Dido as legendary heroes. Carthage in poetry and art. From Roman times to the European Middle Ages, Carthage was always a source of inspiration. Virgil wrote about Dido and her painful separation from Aeneas. Dante, in his Inferno, also mentioned the shadow of Carthage as a symbol of fallen empires. Renaissance paintings often depicted Hannibal crossing the Alps or Dido on her funeral pyre as tragic, epic moments. A civilization immortal in memory, Carthage has disappeared as a city, but in human memory, it is a symbol of pride, creativity, and the desire to live. The lessons from Carthage still hold their value. No empire is immortal. Commerce and intellect can be on par with military might. Pride and freedom are things no fire can destroy. Lasting influence on Rome. Though destroyed, Carthage left indelible marks on Rome itself, the very entity that annihilated it. Carthaginian naval and shipbuilding techniques were copied and improved by Rome, helping it dominate the Mediterranean for centuries. Carthaginian trade became a model for Rome's trade routes and maritime laws. Punic words still appear in Latin, especially terms related to commerce and navigation. Rome, unconsciously, became the heir to Carthage in the economic and maritime spheres, even though they were once determined to erase the city's name. Archaeological legacy. Today, on the mounds of Tunisia, the ruins of Carthage still lie, like the scars of history. The circular harbors, once architectural masterpieces, now only show traces of their existence, but still reveal the advanced capabilities of the Carthaginians. The massive city walls, though ruined, still recall the city's incredible defensive strength. Thousands of artifacts, from Punic pottery and weapons to steles inscribed with the name of Tanit, retell the story of a civilization that refuses to be forgotten. Modern archaeologists, when digging deep into the ashes of Carthage, often say, "We are not just finding artifacts, we are finding the soul of a city that was once the heart of the Mediterranean." Revival in modern culture, Carthage has become an endless source of inspiration for modern literature, film, and art. Historical novels recreate Hannibal's journey across the Alps. Films and classical stage plays depict the tragic love affair of Dido and Aeneas. Contemporary music and poetry still refer to Carthage as a symbol of courage and aspiration. The lesson from Carthage. The story of Carthage is a lesson about the fragility of power and the resilience of the spirit. Carthage fell not only because Rome was stronger, but because of internal division and suppressed ambition. But Carthage also proved that a small city could challenge an entire empire with wisdom and commerce. The whispers of the sea and wind. Whenever one stands on the North African coast, where the circular harbors of Carthage once were, the sound of the wind and waves seems to whisper ancient stories. It is said that on sunset evenings, when the fiery red light shines on the sea, one can see the silhouette of Hannibal on Barca Hill, his gaze fixed on the distance, as if wanting to cross the Alps one more time. Carthage, a symbol of human memory. See, Carthage is no longer just in history books. It has become a part of humanity's collective memory. It reminds us that all glory is fragile before time and war, but spiritual values, the will for freedom, wisdom, and pride, are immortal. And so, we have journeyed together through more than 1,000 years of history, from the day Dido drove her sword into the hot sandy ground to found Carthage, to the battles that shook the Mediterranean and the red flames of that fateful night. Carthage may have turned to dust at the hands of Rome, but the spirit and legacy of that city still live on in words, in stones, and in the wind that blows over Barca Hill. The story of Carthage is a reminder that all empires, no matter how powerful, must yield to time. But it is time itself that has turned Carthage into a legend, a lesson in aspiration, wisdom, and defiance. If you feel this story has taken you on a gentle journey through the pages of ancient history, please subscribe to the Sleep Story History channel. There, you will hear long, profound historical stories told with a soothing rhythm, like a river of time carrying you to sleep. Let Sleep Story History be your nightly companion, guiding you through ancient civilizations, famous empires, and timeless human stories. Don't forget to hit subscribe and the notification bell so you don't miss any journey. Wishing you a deep sleep, and see you in the next story.